Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. I hope you're ready for a deep dive this Monday morning. We're going to talk about the cartels, which, if you paid any attention to the 2024 election, it was a part of the discussion for sure. And for a couple of years, people have asked the question, what happens if we designate the cartels as an FTO, or foreign terrorist organization? Well, that recently happened under President Trump. But what does that actually mean? Most of the conversations are around kinetic options. Are we going to send drones and Reapers and Preds to Mexican airspace? Are we going to drop bombs on people? Are we going to send our JSOC forces over there? It's a largely kinetic conversation. Well, my guest today is Stefano Ritondale, and he specializes in cartels. He is the chief intelligence officer for a civilian company called Artorias. He does a good job of describing what they do, but imagine this. Imagine an OSINT, or open source intelligence platform, that gathers information from left, right, brings in bias and declares bias, but allows an individual through an app to actually look at every piece of OSINT information available and make their own decisions from there. That's what Artorias is working on from a commercial perspective, that an app that can be released. And again, Stefano does a really good job of describing that. But he's got a Twitter account that focuses on the cartels. He's a former Army armor officer with extensive military intelligence experience that has lateraled that in discussing, studying, observing the cartels. It's a fascinating conversation because even myself, I focused very deeply on the kinetic options that I thought it might put to the table. There is so much more, and a lot of this has to do with things that we can do to clean up our own house north of the Mexican border with the United States, due to the authorities and things that will change due to these organizations being declared as an FTO. And it's more than just the cartels. It's Tren de Aragua, which we have 16 states in the United States to include Montana, the home state that I'm at right now. Fascinating conversation. He does a way better job. He actually specializes in this, so I'm going to shut up and let him talk. Episode 373 with Stefano Ritondale. But before we get into that, give me 90 seconds. Let me pay the bills. Let me keep bringing this podcast to everybody for free. So let's talk about today's sponsor. Today's episode is brought to you by Black Rifle Coffee. And today's ad read is all about what you're going to be able to find on their website, the things that they offer D2C, direct to consumer. Let's head over there right now. First thing you're going to see, let's just go across the top. Coffee, apparel, gear, and energy. Now, the energy is a new one. Let's look at what they have in coffee. Subscriptions. You can get all of the bags of coffee that they offer, from the darkest roast to the lightest roast. You can get them on a subscription interval that you want, at a volume that you want, delivered where you want. Then there's the premium coffee subscription, which is the ECS, or the exclusive coffee subscription, or what I say is Evan's Coffee Club, essentially. That's a bag a month of a unique roast that changes every month. And man, they are very different in both appearance, flavor, smell, taste, all of that. It's pretty interesting. Apparel. I mean, if you're a subscriber, you can subscribe to a shirt subscription. If you click on the apparel, you're going to have shirts, women's, hats, hoodies, Black Rifle Friday deals, all sorts of stuff. Gear. This is everything that you could make coffee in, drink coffee out of. And then energy. This is their new one. I'm going to click on this one. Black Rifle Coffee Energy Drink. 200 milligrams of caffeine, 16-ounce can. Pack of 12 is what you can get. 4 flavors that I've seen. One of them is Frost. I've talked about this before. I don't know how they taste tested Frost, but it is what it is. Go to blackriflecoffee.com. They just upgraded their website. They have a ton of D2C offerings, subscriptions, gear, merch, stickers, hats, stuff you can drink it out of. If you like coffee, if you want to support a brand founded by veterans that continues to give back to veterans, head over to blackriflecoffee.com. Let's get into the episode for today.
Okay, got the red smoke.
Gun run, north or south, west of the smoke, west of the smoke.
Okay, copy, west of the smoke. I'm looking at danger close now.
Come on with it, baby, give it to me, I need it. Get cleared hot.
Copy, cleared hot.
Before we talk about the cartels, of which I don't know if I have a SIM card large enough to cover the amount of questions that I have, talk to me about your experience in the military and how you came to do what it is that you do now.
Yes.
Keep that sucker close.
Yeah. So I was so I did active duty 6 years.
How How'd you pick your path? Which path did you
So
go?
I graduated from the Merchant Marine Academy, one of the service academies, like
Okay.
the least known of them.
For sure.
And so it's based out of Kings Point, New York. We're there in Long Island. Merchant Marine Academy, there's a lot of the mariners, the guys who kind of sail, and it's a military academy, but you have like two choices when you graduate. You can either sail as a merchant marine, mariner, third.
We're talking shipping vessels?
Yes,
like large?
correct.
Okay.
Yeah, like containers, ro-ro, whatever you want.
Interesting.
So you do that. So I had to, like, part of my college degree, I had to go like almost a year out at sea. So I went to like on civilian and MSC, military sea lift command.
Yeah.
So I sailed, in the Fifth Fleet area, Europe, Asia, you name it. Did that for, a year. And then obviously the actual degree is 4 years. So when you graduate with your degree plus a Coast Guard license.
Okay.
So you have a choice. You can either sail with the Merchant Marine, the U.S. flag vessels, and be kind of like in the Navy Reserve program for the most part, or you can go active duty. And so, after sailing, I was like, this is not the life I want. Don't get me wrong, And I said, you know what? I'm going to go Army, and I picked like the most land thing possible, armor. Like I mean,
sometimes they got to transport those things sometimes, though.
Yeah.
How did you find the Merchant Marines? Because I will agree with you. I think I had heard before that it was part of the Military Service Academy, but I'll be honest, until you had mentioned it again, I probably would have bet against it actually being that.
So how I found out is because, I think all the academies but the Coast Guard, if I'm not mistaken, you need a congressional or senator's recommendation. So. Right? So the Merchant Marine is one of them. So I did the interview back then with my congressman, did the whole thing. And then, they recommended that I go to the Merchant Marine Academy. I didn't even know about it. No idea. No clue. When I looked into it, I was like, oh my God, this is actually a really good deal because you can either sail or when you commission, pick any branch you want. You want to go Air Force, Navy, Marine, Army, Coast Guard.
What an interesting commissioning pathway.
Exactly. And so generally, I think on average, you have about a third of the graduating class commission active duty.
Okay.
I picked Army. We were 13. Obviously, the number one is generally either the Navy or the Coast Guard, the career path. A lot of people go flight. You have a very good chance of picking flight and aviation from our academy. And, I chose Army, did that, was an armor officer. And
what does that even mean?
well,
I imagine you with a leather aviator helmet on, not a helmet, like a hat, and a flowing scarf on top of a tank pointing.
I would love that, but no, that was not. My first duty. My first duty station was El Paso, Cav Squadron. Did the platoon leader, and then
Did you have spurs?
No, I don't. Funny enough, the requirement to get a spur was there was a certain exercise I had to do. And so by the time I did it and I was eligible to do my spur ride, I got picked to be an aide de camp.
Okay.
And so I became an aide de camp, deployed as part of Operation Inherent Resolve, did that for a year.
Does that mean you had one of those weird things going underneath your arm? And
Yep. Actually, my wedding photos, I have that because I had the little gold stripe. And then you have like a weird insignia because you don't wear your branch anymore. You wear the aide de camp kind of one that indicates, like I think you wear it and then it's like an eagle and it almost looks like the AG one, but it's a little bit different.
And are you just at that point literally an aide to a flag officer?
I did that for actually two generals. I did one general deployed. Then when we came back, I had a separate general that kind of like a little bit in the transition. And then, I decided, just had my daughter, kind of missed the whole means of my deployment. I missed it. So I said, you know what, I can't do active duty, long term, and joined the reserves and then a contract and did that.
How was that being on a fly on the wall in some of those meetings in the flag officer air? I've always been curious, and I've said this many times, because people will ask me my opinion on either strategic or operational planning, and I'll raise my hand and be like, let me tell you who has never consulted on that. Me, because I don't know shit about that stuff. I understand the bottom rung of the tactical ladder, maybe, but I've always been fascinated about those rooms. I'm so curious about the questions. If there is dissenting opinion, if there's room for dissenting opinion, is there back and forth? Because I bet they're used to just seeing aide de camp because they probably go, coffee, 2 creams.
So actually, the first time I ever served my general coffee, I did that.
Yeah.
He was like, I'm going to be the aide. Like, hey, sir, make some coffee. He grabbed it and he looked at me and he said, if you ever serve me coffee again, I'm firing you. I was like, got it.
I already like this guy.
Very well. He was Ranger,
Yeah.
He did. His career path was, active duty, infantry, and then he bounced infantry, Ranger platoon leader, Ranger company commander, Ranger battalion commander. I think he was the brigade commander for 82nd, was wounded, and so he was a very down to earth, very nothing difficult, straightforward, very easily approachable, which was great. And to your point, yes. I mean, when we were deployed for Operation Inherent Resolve, it was as I was a fly in the wall. And there's moments when you kind of stop and you're like, I'm a lieutenant, but you're grasping and listening to all these conversations that kind of open your mind a lot of things. And then
you're talking strategic level stuff, whereas a lieutenant in the Army, which you were, but let's say a lieutenant out in the field, you are not involved in those conversations. You're getting guidance probably written and then disseminated through Battle Space Commander, battalion. Again, you got to tell me. I mean,
it's insane because you do bring up a point. I've had, where it's interesting when they're in a conference room when there's a bunch of general officers and they have the 4-star, let's say, the COCOM commander, the CENTCOM commander, right, for Operation Inherent Resolve, and then you have the OIR commander, the SOGITIF OIR commander, and then all the kind of the subordinate commanding general, and they're going back and forth. I mean, I've seen times where, there's generally an agreement, and I've seen time where it's no, they are going, and then the commander, the overall general might get to a point, it's all right, let's continue planning. But there is a lot of back and forth. And to your point, is
I like that. I like that there's room for dissenting opinion.
Oh, a lot.
I am terrified of the opposite of that.
Correct. From my experience, it was a lot. I've even had to because generals they're calling another general about operations, and they're screaming each other phones all right. Let's close the door, just, but it was great. But to your point, it really provided me a perspective. And then also, you have general officers, and then they're kind of the staff level, the staff principals, the OICs that are generally colonels or lieutenant colonels, same. And it was a lot of teaching and mentoring, because they say a lieutenant, and, I'm lost. Let's be real. I mean, you have no idea what's going on.
Lieutenants are made to be lost.
Exactly. But they coach and mentor you. I mean, I was a lieutenant, and I was learning the difference between Title 10, Title 32, and Title 50.
Yeah.
As a lieutenant, because they would say, oh, that's Title 50, and I was like,
I learned about that after military service when I researched it on my own.
And my general would pull me aside. He's like, you don't know? Here you go. This is Title 50. I was like, oh my God.
All I would say was, I'm sorry, what are we doing? Where are we going? We have permission to do this? Yeah. Let's go. Title what? Yep. Title let's go.
And then another thing was going to embassies, right? We would have to go a lot to the embassies. And that's a whole different world.
Yeah.
The State, but even the military component within the embassies, within the State Departments, and how they operate and how they work. It was a breadth of knowledge that was... what I would recommend any lieutenant, right? The Army has a career path for you, platoon leader, XO, staff, captain career course, and then you move on. I say, look, if you got an opportunity to do something different, you're going to make captain. Unless you're major screw up, you're going to make captain. If an opportunity comes, even if you don't deploy, even if you're an aide de camp garrison, which I did, it's great because you also learn a lot of the roles and responsibilities of how they deploy forces, but at the G staff level, at the division level, and things that you would think about as a platoon leader when you would look up and you'd be like, oh my God, battalion or brigade or division is screwing us over. When you serve at that, then you understand the nuances, kind of the approach and all that. And it was a fascinating experience, and I really loved it and enjoyed it.
Okay. What, so you did 6 years active duty?
Yeah, so I did.
So you almost put captain on it. And people listening, in the beauty of the military infrastructure, services are not allowed to use the same rank structure name. Same rank structure, not the same names.
Yeah.
It's funny, you say lieutenant in the Navy, that's an 03. Mm-hmm. Captain in the Navy is an 06.
Correct.
Captain in the Army is an 03.
Yeah.
On a phone call, that can get confusing real fast when you're going inter-service.
Yeah. When you're working in a joint command, What branch? Sorry, sir. What branch? Oh, Navy. Oh, okay. That's definitely to the general. Oh, you're an 03. I can push you on to co-ops. Okay.
Yeah. Not a mistake you want to make, one that I have made. Learned my lesson on that one quickly, and always differentiated between services.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And no, so after my aide, kind of funny, weird career path, I ended up being an S2 in an MP battalion.
So Intel, for people listening, in the Navy that's N2, in the joint world it's J2, but TAC whatever 2 is going to be your Intel space.
So I did that for 2 years. I was a battalion S2 with an MP battalion.
How did they switch you over from somebody who came from an armor background, aide de camp background? What kind of education, training, teaching is involved to go into the Intel world?
I had before I was supposed to go to Captain Career Course, before I decided to leave active duty, because after active duty, I went reserves. What happened was my plan was I wanted to do a functional area called strategic intelligence.
Okay.
And there's generally a rule of thumb that if you're an aide de camp, you kind of get to pick your next position.
I've heard this.
Yes, and so
Because it's not the most glorious position. So there's bennies.
correct. And so I became kind of like, they put me under the G2, the 1AD G2, because I was in Fort Bliss, El Paso. I was in the collection cell with the G2. And so I believe, it's been such a long time ago, I believe it was one of the CPXs, the command post exercises prior to a warfighter. And so they put me into the G2 because my long-term objective was to do strategic intelligence. And since I was an aide de camp, a lot of the people that kind of decide, the people are like, oh yeah, I know exactly where to put you. I know who you need to be under to get the best training and opportunity for your long-term goal. So I did that, and when I decided to get out, because I missed a year of my daughter's life, who was just born. I was like, I can't. I just started my military career. It was a lot, and I said, I can't do this long term. They decided, what happened was 1AD deployed, but since I just came back from deployment, obviously I wasn't going to go, and they said, hey, there's a battalion S2 positioning open up. Why don't you take it since you're getting out? You've been in the G2. It's crazy. And even sometimes to the previous point of aide de camp, especially in deployed environment, you see, because you're following the general everywhere, just by exposure, you learn a lot of staff processes. Oh, I bet. You learn like a lot of how everything kind of works. And so they said, hey, why don't we just send you to the MP battalion, the 93rd MP battalion. They're in Fort Bliss, and you'll be the S2. And what was funny is I wasn't branch detail. So branch detail is like you have an MOS when you're a lieutenant, but then when you're a captain, your captain career course is a separate branch, right? It's like MI. And a lot of times, because the MI world, how it works is you have a little lieutenants, like not many lieutenants, and then captain, it grows the amount of captains in the MI. So a lot of them are branch detail, similar to signal, right? So they sent me to the MP battalion, and I was talking to my XO there who was there, and I was kind of like interviewing for him. And he said, okay, so you're branch detail, you're armor branch detail. I was like, no, sir, I'm not branch. I'm like pure armor. I'm a 19 Alpha. And for him, he was like, I'm an MP. I want to incorporate myself in combat, like with the combat arms. You're telling me that in my MTO, in my list of people, I'm going to have in my billets that I've never authorized a 19 Alpha. I'm like, sir, technically you would. And he's like, I'm keeping you. I want an armor officer in my staff. I think it's cool. It's great. And I did that for 2 years. And in the position when I was doing that for 2 years, I did kind of a lot of overseas training missions, like, 1 month here, 1 month here. And so one of the ones
JSETs, if you will, yeah.
Yeah. And so what I did was one to Mexico under Army North. It was a training mission about, I think it was 4 weeks. One of the best Army experience I've ever had. I mean, you want to talk about, I think a lot of people who went to the Middle East, one of the things you kind of hear is kind of the lack of professionalism in the military, and you're kind of like pulling your hair, and you're like they just don't get it.
Talking about dealing with the local nationals, with the local forces, yeah.
Correct. Not with the Mexicans. I mean, these guys were amazing. And even so, when I went, what we realized was, which was a breath of fresh air, because I did other missions with other countries where you realize they send always their officers to train with the Americans in like a classroom environment, because they want that certificate. U.S. military gives them kind of that prestige. The Mexicans, when we did it, they had one officer, and I think it was like 30 NCOs.
They sent you the E5 Mafia.
E5, E6, E7. It was, and so we were 2 officers and 2 NCOs in this for the Army side. They had one captain, like 30 NCOs, and I think like 4 soldiers being ready to get promoted. We had to completely change everything because we're like, wow, these guys get it. They understand the importance of the NCO corps. They still have a ways to go. There's some, but there's like, okay, wow, they understand the NCOs matter. And so we really wanted to push more to the NCOs to kind of give a lot of the classes to show, hey, you're on the right path. And training them, these guys were very professional. I mean, they've been fighting the Mexican cartels for, at that point when I was there, over 10 years. This was, 2018. Okay. So 12 years since 2006. they understood, they kind of got it, and they were interested actually in a lot of the things that we learned from Iraq, Afghanistan, specifically like IEDs, react to an ambush in an urban environment. Those were the things they were wanting, and other the things that we had originally planned to train them on, like riot control and all that. I mean, these guys were experts; like they could teach us, and we're like, all right, we're going to remove that from the curriculum. Let's focus on what you guys want. And so I had that, and then in 2018. When President Trump, and during his first administration, ordered the deployment to the border, I went to the border. So I was in San Diego under an SP MAGTF. We fell under a Marine SP MAGTF. We were like I think it's the ground component on the threat. I think there's like a ground logistics and engineers. I think that's or air component. I think that's kind of the basic constructs in SP MAGTF. Sorry to my Marines if I get it wrong, but we were kind of the ground, the MPs, and we were there to provide protection to the Marines, who were the engineers who were reinforcing the border.
So you were right up against the Mexican border in San Diego?
Yes.
Down by like the Brownfield Airport? Or farther east into like the Jamul Mountains?
Literally like Imperial Beach.
Okay.
Straight down. I mean, that was our area. So those ports of entries and that area was our responsibility. And this was during the first caravan, so we tracked them because they sent the military kind of across the border because there was this one specific caravan that they were monitoring, and then the caravan took the western route and went to San Diego. So it was, we were the ones that were there when that happened. So between my deployment to Mexico, my time at the border, and having an understanding of like OSINT and open source intelligence and doing it how the military leveraged it, how we did it, and kind of became a professional passion of mine. That's kind of how I ended up then doing what I do now, which is kind of the Mexican cartels. Because since then, I did DoD contracting, and now I'm part of a company called Artorias. I'm the chief intelligence officer, and we are we are an intelligence company that does AI and LLM analysis and like large data aggregation, and we provide summaries. And about a month from now, we're going to launch an app for the regular consumer, $10 a month. And our plan is to give you all the open source intelligence on any country in the world, any conflict in the world, any data stream you want. It could be economic, it can be health, et cetera. We'll build all the streams, and basically your ability through your phone. You've probably seen it like the open source intelligence reporting when you're deployed, and it's like, oh, this is everything that posted open source. We want to do the same, but now on an app, and you control it, you can see it, and you're able to see that. So that's something we're hoping to launch fairly soon for everybody, and that's kind of where
I don't think traditional media sources are going to enjoy your app.
Well,
we are a little bit cutting out the middleman here on the delivery mechanism, which is in turn stealing their opportunity to sell soap on their advertising breaks.
We want to make sure that people understand we provide intelligence in the open source. And honestly, I think, you've seen it. Let's look at Russia, Ukraine, right, as an example. The moment the Russian tanks crossed the border, we all went to Twitter, to social media, right? Because it's quicker than traditional, even in the government. Even the government does this, right? You have your capabilities to collect and to classify something, but the moment the tanks cross, everybody's looking, what's social media saying?
Some dude with a cell phone is going to be your front leading edge reporter at that point, for at least a short period of time.
And then that's the goal, is to now feed that to the user, to give that open source intelligence information so that you're able to see it how you want to see it. You don't have to go through, wait on X news organization or something. It's straight to you direct, and that's something we want to do. And it's a bunch of friends of mine, we created this company. And we're all very in tune to the open source intelligence community on X, formerly known as Twitter. And that's kind of, I got brought on board because of just my experience in doing a lot of the intel, and then where I focus in Mexican cartels. That's kind of where I was brought in. And I even use our data stream for Mexico from our company that we have right now on our website, because it's a lot for one person. It's the complexity of the nature, the amount of events that happens. I need that type of information as well.
So let me ask you this before we get into the cartels. Okay, and there are some people who they're a little bit freaked out that the active duty military was mobilized again. As you mentioned, it has happened before. It actually happened under Biden as well. There is passive comitatus, which prevents military from acting in a law enforcement capacity. When you guys were down there, though, there was one main difference under the previous Trump administration. There hadn't been a declaration of the Mexican cartels as a terrorist organization. And my question is around, essentially, how clear was your guys' guidance and around ROEs? Because something that has happened recently, and I mean, actually, I'm going to ask you whether or not this reporting was true. I read an article that some cartel members, in air quotes, because who fucking knows, right? Took some pot shots back across the border.
The Border Patrol, yeah.
Now, here's interesting. If the U.S. military was deployed there, I'm curious, let's say that you had been in San Diego and somebody had taken a pot shot across the border. I'm curious what your guidance was in that situation, and I'm curious what you think the change would be now that they're designated a terrorist organization and the U.S. military is on the border.
So when I was in 2018, it was crystal clear. No question about it. Posse comitatus.
Okay.
Here's a funny story. We had a couple guys in the border. They were there providing, protection. I think they were doing some engineering work, and so they were in one area. And they noticed a couple migrants jump the fence, the wall. And the migrants kind of stopped, and they're like, "Oh God, they got us. The military got
Traditional
it."
visual standoff.
Yeah. And then the military, because of posse comitatus, we cannot touch migrants. Cannot even touch them. Can't Title 10. If you're Title 32 National Guard, like Texas under Operation Lone Star, different ball game. You have
but
the
for
authority.
an active duty guy, you cannot act in that law enforcement capacity. Yeah.
And so the military guys just kind of stood there and they picked up the radio and they told Border Patrol, "Hey, we got, 2 migrants just jumped the wall," and the migrants bolted and ran away. And they said, "Yep, they're going east, heading down this road."
Yeah.
Posse comitatus.
Yeah, limited
Cannot
authorities.
touch. So what I would say, and one of my roles.
What about if they were shot at during that time period?
So one of the roles I had was the interesting aspect when we were doing kind of the threat briefs was there was never really a clear indication that there was necessarily a threat against us from the cartels. But like Amber Ferreros, you have the right to defend yourself. Service members, especially that's why the military police was there, because their job was to guard the Marines. Hey, you have the right to defend yourself.
So standard ROE is still applied.
Standard ROEs. If you're getting shot at, standard
Inherent
ROE.
right to self-defense. Okay.
You have an inherent right to self-defense. I would probably assume, maybe that's a decision on the ground. Hey, do we shoot back? Do we take cover? Do we call for a backup?
Proportional response as well. Maybe don't send a tow missile at a guy with a 6-shooter. Yeah.
But exactly.
Or maybe do.
So this latest incident that happened, it was a Border Patrol agent. I would say I think Border Patrol, they do get probably shot at more than it's actually picked up in the press.
I would not be surprised.
Yeah, talking to kind of my coverage and all that, and one of the areas where I focus on, they do get shot at more regularly. That specific incident, it was near Fronton, Texas. I had conversations with kind of a lot of the cartel community that monitors them on Twitter, and one of the things that we were trying to debate was, okay, there was probably there's 3 possibilities of who did this, and there's one more likely who was responsible and 2 less likely. The more likely one, based on the location where it happened and across the border, it's a cartel called CDN, Cartel del Noreste, the Northeast Cartel. The Northeast Cartel is a successor of the Zetas cartels, the very infamous and famous Zetas cartels, because they're based out of Nuevo Laredo, Tamaulipas, Laredo, Texas, the border city. And they operate all the way up. Actually, that's almost kind of the border of the areas that they control. If you kind of look at Tamaulipas and Texas, and you kind of go southeast from Laredo, Texas, and you go down, where that shooting occurred in that specific area, that's kind of like the front line. But that's generally considered CDN territory. The second group is their rivals, a rival cartel, is called the Metros. They're a faction of the Gulf Cartel. So the Gulf Cartel is in a civil war. There's 2 different ones. They're one of the main ones. They're based out of Reynosa, Tamaulipas, which borders McAllen. That's the second possibility, but more distinct. And then the third possibility is, human smuggling networks that are just not affiliated with any cartels, because a lot of times I think people think, migrants crossing the border inherently cartels. That's not generally the case, actually. There's dozens, if not hundreds, of unaffiliated human smuggling networks that either pay a fee to operate in those plazas, but they run their own operations. Like the tunnel that was discovered in El Paso recently, that wasn't necessarily tied to a specific cartel that we know of, at least publicly, but more than likely it was also just human smuggling networks. And a lot of times those human smuggling networks fight each other kind of outside of the scope of the cartels. But in the specific example with Border Patrol, I'm leaning towards CDN because they're one of them that are more probably aggressive in how they operate. And I think that if there was going to be kind of that threat, and U.S. military personnel are getting shot at by them, my understanding is like, well, at that point, standard ROEs. You get shot at, you shoot back, you have the right to defend yourself. Border Patrol responded, they shot back. They luckily, no U.S. Border Patrol agents had suffered any casualties. I'm not tracking any reporting that even the cartel members, if they were cartel members, suffered any casualties. But standard rules of engagements would definitely apply in those situations.
Okay. What, in your opinion, and this is something that I had heard talked about for many years before Trump came into office and actually made this declaration, but people were talking about, hey, one of the keys to this, fighting the cartels, is we have to designate them as a terrorist organization. So that just happened. Mm-hmm. What does that change? Like, in reality, what does that, if there was something that was off the table, what is now on the table or different than before that designation?
It's really hard to specifically say. The only thing I can really pinpoint directly that an FTO designation would make a difference is the penalties to support a cartel. Right? I think it would enable the Treasury Department in specific. I mean, the Treasury Department, especially if you look at the previous administration, the Biden administration, they have been very aggressive, the Treasury Department, of announcing sanctions against businesses involved in drug trafficking, specifically fentanyl, extremely aggressive at targeting these Mexican businesses. One of the interesting aspects, though, now is that, let's say you're an American citizen and you're doing money laundering for an FTO designated cartel. Well, now you can get charged with not only a cartel, now there's a more hefty penalty for it, prison time, because now you're doing it for a foreign terrorist organization.
Yeah, you're aiding and abetting a terrorist organization. That's a little spicy.
Exactly. Weapon smuggling, right? Around 70% of the guns that Mexican military personnel seize from cartels are traced back to the United States. Gun stores, all that. Well, now you get caught. Now you're aiding and arming, not only financing, but now arming a foreign terrorist organization. Right. Besides that, there's not an AUMF. Right, I don't think anybody would make an argument
that's authorized use of military force.
Yeah, sorry. Yes, thank you. I gotta get there, but
So what you hear online,
yeah,
and again, is online reflective of the real world? That is a multi-day conversation in of itself. Delta Force is going in. We're gonna get them. And, we were chatting about this as we were walking over here. I'm not so sure that's what it looks like. I'm not even so sure that's necessarily a viable solution to the battlefield or battle space, however you'd want to describe it.
I will say, I think ever since this FTO designation, I've been flooded now with,
I bet.
Like flooded.
There's probably people with a few questions. Myself.
Yeah. So, here I had it, with the Rolling Stones, and I don't even think I didn't even say this in the beginning. I'm All Source News on Twitter. And so, I did an interview for the Rolling Stones to kind of help them kind of that. And that was some of the specific areas we're talking about. What I would say is, this is such a convoluted. I can go on and on.
Paint with the broom.
Yeah, I know.
The canvas is yours. Paint the picture of what people. I think most people in the U.S. understand that there are cartels in Mexico. I think a lot of people would understand that there is cartel influence in Mexican politics, and an argument can be made of how closely tied, and also in what area. And I think a lot of people may understand that they're also tied into very legitimate businesses as well. There's local government, state government, federal government involvement in all of those things. Break it down for us.
So let me start big to then small. And actually this is what I'll probably mention when we were walking in before we recorded was, so I think when most people talk about Mexican cartels, there's two specific ones that I think get the name recognition that probably most people know about. It's the Sinaloa cartel and CJNG, the Jalisco New Generation Cartel. Right now, under the United States, there's the Treasury Department recognizes two specific Mexican cartels as transnational criminal organizations. That is the Sinaloa cartel and CJNG. Every other of the cartels are drug trafficking organizations, right? So there's kind of, anything can change. We'll have to wait. When the executive order was signed, the State Department now under, Marco Rubio has, 14 days from it was signing to list specifically which Mexican cartels would fall under the FTO designation. The other two were Tren de Aragua, which is a Venezuelan prison gang who has been very aggressive in its expansion. Specifically, I know we talk a lot about it in the United States, but in South America,
Of the 16 states that I heard last reported, Montana is actually one of them with TDA influence.
Yeah.
Down in Bozeman specifically.
So TDA, the first time I saw them was back in 2023. I actually sent a tweet because people were still talking about MS-13, which is the other group that's going to get the FTO designation, which is ironic because MS-13 has been severely weakened. TDA, it was the one. I mean, this was the one that was like, even for a country like Chile, let's say, to have an increased level in violence and for security, for the people in Chile, the population of Chile to say, we are concerned about security, that's a big deal because Chile is generally a very safe country. That was TDA, Tren de Aragua. And so, those two were kind of getting it. Going back to the Mexican cartels, because of that TCO designation, Transnational Criminal Organization, there's being just the Sinaloa cartel and CG&G, my initial thought process, and this is kind of talking also to sources, is those two will probably get the FTO designation, the Foreign Terrorist Organization, meaning not only the cartel, but there's their affiliates and subgroups. Because cartels, how they operate, it is a pyramid, but it's the leader and then more importantly, the factions underneath the cartels, right? And so when let's look at Sinaloa. The problem right now for the Sinaloa cartel is they're in active civil war. There's an active civil war within the Sinaloa cartel between the two main factions. It's Los Chapitos, who are the sons of El Chapo, who was in U.S. prison, the sons of El Chapo. And then it used to be called the Mayo Zambada faction. Now they're called the Mayito Flacos, which is the son of Mayo Zambada. Why? Mayo Zambada last year was detained, was captured, and extradited to the United States. For those who don't know, I mean, this is like literally a Hollywood movie scene, right? I mean, this is the picture.
We're talking like gunfights in the street type
No,
shit.
even crazier. Not even gunfight, just the idea of how they did it. So just to paint the picture, Mayo Zambada has been doing drug trafficking for 40 years. He's been El Chapo's right-hand man. And you can even talk to cartel observers and experts. A lot of them would say Mayo Zambada was more powerful than El Chapo. Mayo Zambada was never even close to getting captured. Never. Never had there been any report that he was this close, that the Mexican military was after him, all that. Like, this guy was the most powerful drug lord. I would argue probably in many ways, if not more powerful than El Chapo. Definitely after El Chapo's captured, he was the most influential one and the more powerful one. And he was untouchable. I mean, he was basically untouchable. What happened was the FBI, from what I'm told, and from my sources, but specifically, I mean, the operation is doing, but I'm being told that this was led by the FBI, managed to churn one of El Chapo's sons. So Los Chapitos is kind of the brothers are Ivan Archibaldo. He's probably the main one. Ovidio Guzman, who was captured in 2024, at the beginning of 2024, 2023. Ovidio Guzman was captured. Jesus Alfredo, and then Joaquin Guzman, right? Those are the Chapitos, the brothers. Joaquin Guzman was probably like the less influential, but he was still part of the leadership of Los Chapitos. Apparently what happened, and they managed to turn Joaquin Guzman into an informant to the FBI or to the DEA, right?
That sounds like a very complicated and long process. Impressive they were able to do that, actually.
And so what they did was they managed to convince, because Ovidio Guzman, the one that was captured, he's in the U.S. He's in prison in the United States. Joaquin Guzman convinced Mayo Zambada to board a private jet with him because he said, I'm going to fly you to see a property somewhere, somewhere in Mexico, close, somewhat close. I think it was in Chihuahua they were going to try to send him, or somewhere around there, somewhere close to the border, so he can show some property or an airship or something along those lines to show him that. But the plane, instead of going to Mexico, flew into basically right outside of El Paso, where when the ramps lowered, there was U.S. federal law enforcement, captured Mayo Zambada and took him.
No way.
That's how they did it. Not a shot was fired. When I saw...
Yeah, there's going to be repercussions for that.
I remember when the news broke, somebody sent me a tip and said, hey, they got it, Mayo Zambada. I was like, there's no way. How? And they said, no, he's in an airport in El Paso. Nah, get out of here. There's no way. And then like, oh my God, they how? And somehow, I got to give kudos to Merrick Garland. I mean, that's the Department of Justice under him. They got him that way. This guy who was the most powerful drug lord, untouchable for 40 years, put him on a plane, flew him.
Not a shot fired. Ramp comes down. Oh, we have some questions on your customs and immigration form.
There was probably, I know during like some areas, like there was some, I think there was an agent was killed at like the Chapo back then a little bit. There were some shots, and it's all very convoluted. But for the most part, it wasn't like this Ovidio Guzman, the other son who was captured in Culiacan, in Sinaloa, the capital of Sinaloa. I mean, that's like the famous Culiacanazo, when the city just went terrible, violence, smokes, the Mexican military cartels, remember, battling out. That didn't happen with Mayo Zambada. Yeah, they just captured him, flew him in a plane, and now he's in the United States. The last reporting we got, he's in negotiations with the U.S. to get into a plea deal, and the U.S. is going to want, to your point earlier, hey, what do you know about corruption in Mexico and how it's tied in? So
is that the origin of the Civil War in the
correct.
Okay, I was going to say there's probably going to be a few repercussions to said activities. Mm-hmm. Okay.
So what happened was, after Mayo Zambada was captured, you had Mayito Flaco, the son, took over. And quickly, because I track a lot of the cartel's social media and their messaging groups and all that, and that's how
Why do they use social media?
They
Why
love
is a
it.
cartel using social media?
I think people misunderstand cartels. They think there's a secret. They're not. They go on. If you know where to look, you can find them. Actually,
really? Michael, prepare yourself. Shall we fire up Twitter or X?
You can maybe do Instagram.
Oh, yes.
I mean, I can try to see, because I have a burner one I can see. So one of the ways you can identify them.
Michael, please log into your account and not mine. NSA and anybody listening, this is Michael Shelton's search history, not my own.
There's an actual, one of the ways you can track them, I'm not kidding, is emojis.
Are you serious?
That's how. So there's an account on Twitter who did a great thread with two other accounts. I did a short interview. I was interviewed for a major Mexican radio show about it, because I did a post about it, like I think all the way back in 2022. They did an upload of it, and one of the ways you can track them and see who's posting when and who they're affiliated to is emojis. So Mayo Zambada is very famous because of the cowboy hat. If you see a cowboy hat, that's how you know he's the Mayo Zambada. Los Chapitos, they go also by Chapiza, pizza. So the pizza emoji.
Come on.
Swear to God. Actually, that's their calling cards. So what they'll do is when they do an execution and they leave the bodies, they'll leave the cowboy hat, and that's how you know, oh, okay. Or they'll leave a decapitated head inside of a pizza box.
Is it like a deep dish pizza box? Because it'd be tough to close the lid on.
No, they can't close it.
Okay,
they just leave it open and then they put it there with the sliced pizza.
I was going to say, hold on, I'm running through the mechanics of that. That's a tough fit. All right.
Another one is like one of the flower emojis. That, for example, is the guy's name is El Jardinero. He's one of the lieutenants of El Mencho, one of the key leaders of El Mencho of CG&G. So El Mencho is the overall leader. His nickname is Jardinero. In English, that's the gardener. So he has a very specific type of flower emoji that they use to identify themselves with.
I mean, this is almost it's almost a soft form of intimidation as well, right? You're putting it out there on a consumer-facing app. People can see that you're out there. They can see that you're active, and you just leave this little calling card that if you know what it is, you know what it is. If you're a pizza fan, you're like, where do I get this deep dish? But it's just, it reminds people in a very passive way that you're kind of out there and that you're active and interesting. But and obviously the other side of that coin is people you may not want watching you can definitely watch what the hell you're up to.
They don't care. I think and that's the point. The cartels don't care. These guys are in Mexico. I mean, I've tracked American cartel members, like easily geolocated. Like, dude, that's like, I think one of them was in Columbus, Ohio. Like, dude, I can clearly see that's Columbus, Ohio. Openly post that he's there. In Phoenix, Arizona, I've seen some of these guys. Now, again, there's not many, and I think I don't want people to freak out, but they don't care. It's just this idea of almost like this bravado. Like, what are you going to do about it?
Well, if you're in Mexico, probably nothing. I mean, if you're in Columbus, Ohio, I would like to think we got somebody there's like a red bat phone somewhere that somebody could call.
You would hope. So to that earlier conversation, about the Sinaloa Cartel Civil War, the capture of the father hit the son was like, one of your brothers, Los Chapitos, betrayed us. This is war. It took a little bit. It didn't happen immediately, but there was build up and build up and build up. And then one day, boom. And so now most of the violence in the Sinaloa cartel, within the Sinaloa Cartel Civil War, is in Sinaloa, in the western part. It's not a border state. Southwest Sonora, Durango, that's most of the areas kind of in the western part where the heartland of the Sinaloa cartel. And so that's kind of how the Civil War happened. And even though, the Justice Department, right, and the Treasury Department, they say Sinaloa cartel, but they know how to differentiate between los Chapitos and like the Mayito Flaco and Mayo Zambada, right, that faction. They differentiated, but they still kind of put that banner. And those are probably going to be the two that have that FTO designation because of the reach they have. Now, the Sinaloa cartel, the Civil War has been has weakened them a lot. And so clearly, I think right now, because of that situation, you can maybe make the argument that now CG&G is kind of gaining strength. But what I would say, Mayito Flaco, the son of Mayo Zambada, who's really pushing a lot, I mean, he's been very aggressive inside Mexico. Like he has gone on the warpath, not only against Los Chapitos, he's gone on the warpath against CG&G in Zacatecas, in Chiapas, all these other states. I mean, Nayarit, which is also like a very, El Jardinero, he's based out of Nayarit.
So they're fighting everybody.
But they all fight each other. There's rumors, probably more than rumors. There's some alliances that happen out of convenience. So there's rumors that Chapitos have allied themselves with CG&G because now they're fighting a common enemy, which is Mayito Flaco.
Friend of my enemy. How does that work? Enemy of
my enemy is my friend.
Yeah.
So Mayito Flaco, for example, his call sign emoji is the horse, like the horse head. That's what he uses. He uses the horse head. So that's how you can kind of identify that. And it's kind of like a magician hat as well. Those are the two that we see him. I have no idea the magician hat. I am not going to lie.
I'm going to be honest with you. I feel like I've missed the boat by not having an emoji. Do you have an emoji, Michael, that I don't know about?
I mean, you have the mountain.
Is yours an eggplant? Like, what do we...
I would use the mountain right there.
Yeah, but I don't use it for anything. I'm behind the curve. I need to leave my mark, my nom de plume or whatever it is, on whatever it is that I touch.
Yeah. I mean, that's literally how you track them. It's just, and they'll put it out there. That's how they know. That's how you know.
How brash and brazen.
And what my suspicion is the reason why they do that is because they understand that if you put like Sinaloa cartel, the algorithm will take it down. But if you put an emoji,
people get around all the spelling of words and stuff like that as well too.
Yeah.
Unpack for me, in your best estimation, the cartel situation with involvement in legitimate business in Mexico and government.
Yeah, so I think a lot of people, and I think that's an excellent point, misunderstand that cartels are involved just with drug trafficking.
Which, of course, they are.
They are, yeah, absolutely.
It's not their whole business model. And from what I can tell, they are evolving like any other businesses. Like, maybe clean money, to use air quotes, is better than muling fentanyl across the border.
So one of the things that we know they traffic is lime and avocados. So Michoacan specifically, they will. There's a huge fighting going on between two cartels, but mainly two cartels. There's more, but I'm just going to focus on here. There's one group called Carteles Unidos, the United Cartels, and then CG&G. And historically, a lot of the fighting that occurs is actually in very remote areas of Michoacan. And the New York Times did a very great reporting on this years ago that highlighted that one of the reasons why they're fighting is because of the avocado farmers in that region, the lime farmers and all that, right, in that specific region. To the point where it got so bad that the U.S. had to temporarily suspend all avocado shipments to the United States because USDA inspectors were getting threatened. And so they halted that. So because they fight for that, because they want that. Oil, absolutely. They try to smuggle oil. They'll try to sell them on their own. They'll try to tap into the oil pipelines or steal that, et cetera. That was actually a huge program of the previous Mexican president, Andrés Manuel López Obrador, AMLO. He was very much and I would say probably more effectively, he did manage to try to at least clamp down a lot harder on kind of people stealing Mexican oil in the pipelines.
Even if they're not stealing it, are they also taxing, for lack of a better term, to allow people? Yep. Right. So they're taking a scrape in every place that they
the vehicle specifically going to the border, crossing the border. They're equivalent of a tax.
Yeah.
The cartels.
You can call it whatever you want to. It's a payment, so you don't get your head lopped off.
Yeah, absolutely. It's an extortion.
I would pay that tax.
Yeah, and everybody does, and that kind of that's how they do it. But they do that. Used cars. That's another example. Yeah. So they're and I tell that to people who would argue like, if we legalize drugs, that would weaken the cartels, or that would. Cartels would go away because now you've legalized drugs. And my counter to that would be they're in much more businesses that are legal They just find a way to get in there. But the second piece would be also, I mean, they'll find a way, even if it's legalized, to still try to make a profit, right?
Yeah.
If you look
Marijuana is a good example, actually.
the California marijuana farms and even in Oklahoma, et cetera, there's a lot of organized crime groups that tap into the marijuana business that is legal in many states in the United States to make a profit. They just, it almost as if the marijuana, what the legalization did is the illegal marijuana, instead of coming from Mexico to the United States, shipped north. And now it's all done in the United States.
Yeah.
That's what happened. And so, I'm not trying to make an argument one way or another. Drugs should be treated more as mental health or harsh crime. Like, that is not my argument. I don't want people to misconstrue it. But, I think we have a tendency in the United States to analyze the Mexican cartels from a U.S. domestic politics point of view. And I think that's the wrong way of doing it.
People want a binary light switch solution.
Correct.
If we just legalize, click, all problems gone. I don't know of anything in the world that works in that binary. And going to talk about the diversification of the cartels, I host a podcast called Change Agents with Ironclad, and I've talked with quite a few people about cartel involvement, and they're bringing up stuff like call centers where they're scamming people out of, timeshares or retirement. And we're talking relatively sophisticated operations that that are not legal, but you may not necessarily associate them with what you think of a cartel with. Most people are thinking people hanging headless from a bridge or something like that. And same organization, different outreach arm, if you will.
So the Treasury Department actually, I think, sanctioned specifically one of the Mexican call centers because of that, because they were tied to CG&G. They sanctioned them specifically by that.
And if you look at that, like, okay, this is not a binary solution. These people are trying to figure out ways not only to have illegitimate revenue sources, in which the numbers I was seeing was hundreds of millions of dollars. My first question to that is, why would anybody, because they broke down a little bit, someone had the scheme of the way it would work. And, there's a particular tax that we need you to pay on this, so you're going to have to pay via check. I'm like, you didn't notice the ticker tape parade of red flags that were going on here for you to, like, what's going on? Stop sending money to people you don't know.
But Americans have been scammed in a lot of these.
A lot of it is an elderly population.
Exactly. Timeshares is another perfect. You said that has been also, I believe, even the Treasury Department sanctioned the timeshares. But one of the cartels I'd mention is called the Santa Rosa de Lima cartel. They're based out of Guanajuato, which is kind of like in central Mexico. I would say, if you're looking at drug trafficking organization, obviously they're one, but they're not one of the largest one. They're not one of the biggest one. But I will tell you this, those guys are very extremely violent. So when you see, for example, in the news, there's a mass shooting in a bar in Mexico, which unfortunately doesn't make international news like it would in the United States. Your safest bet, especially if it happens in Guanajuato, 9 times out of 10, that was the Santa Rosa de Lima cartel. Like, I've seen the videos where they'll burst in a bar, open, and they record the whole thing, and they'll just spray.
So they're actually targeting indiscriminately.
Well, they target, so like nightclubs, bars, businesses that either don't pay them the extortion fee or are serving as either paying the extortion fee to their rivals or serving as a front for money laundering to the rival. Because the Santa Rosa Lima cartel is a very territorial centric organization that leverages specifically extortion for money laundering. And their symbol, here's their emoji, is the hammer, like the 2 hammers that are kind of crossed, and then a red triangle, because that's their symbol. So it was a triangle with 2 hammers in the back. So their emoji is that, like the hammer and the red triangle. That's what they use. Very territorial. I mean, and these guys are another one that are very violent. Last year, there was a couple of car bombings in Guanajuato that more than likely it was them. They have no problem actively targeting Mexican police. Like, Guanajuato is one of the most violent states. I think it's the most violent state right now in Mexico, and where the highest number of Mexican police officers are assassinated. The vast majority of that can be directly tied to this cartel that almost became defunct a while ago. In 2021, 2020, they almost became defunct, and they revert back, and they're very, very aggressive, but to the point of the legitimate businesses. I mean, yeah, of course, they probably do drug trafficking, but they are very territorial, and I want to leverage this to make a point about Mexican cartels. There's the great author, I've talked to him a lot. His name is Nathan Jones. He's on Twitter. I think it's Nathan P. Jones. And he wrote a book. This was, I think, in 2016 he wrote it. And it kind of really helped me frame my understanding of Mexican cartels. And so even it's like almost 10 years old, I highly recommend people to buy it and read it. Because what he realized during his studies of the Mexican cartels is that there was basically 2 types of cartels. There was the territorial cartels and the transactional cartels, right? So territorial, focused on territorial control. Transactional, let's just ship product. Historically, in Mexico, all the cartels were basically transactional. There was some territorial. And what he realized in his study is that the territorial cartels were a lot more violent because they needed to hold the territory either against their rivals or against the Mexican government. If they couldn't achieve territorial control through corruption, they're going to do it through violence. The Zetas cartels is a perfect example of a very territorial cartel. What I've noticed, and I've had conversations with a lot of people, and specifically with him, is that basically all the cartels are now territorial. They've all transitioned. Yes, they send products, but they require the territorial control first and foremost over everything else. And that's the problem that we're running into, that they become a territorial-centric organization and they fight each other. And the weaker sometimes a cartel gets, that's when the split happens and the violence increases because that's the focus. So like the Sinaloa cartel, I spoke of one split, which was the Chapitos and the Mayito Flaco, right? The Mayo Zambada. Well, before that, there was another split. Within Los Chapitos, there was a split that affected Sonora, which, as I mentioned in the beginning of the podcast, kind of you have the cartels and then their factions. There was a couple of factions that were used to be very close to the Chapitos, and I'm going to name two just for argument's sake. Los Fantasmas, kind of like the ghosts, and Los Salazars. Those were kind of two main ones, and there's more. They were very active in Sonora. And this is one of the few areas that you can directly point into Mexico where the violence happened. It probably was triggered because of the human smuggling routes, and they wanted to control that. In 2023, the Salazars and Los Cazadores, Fantasma, they're called Fantasma Cazadores, they broke off from Los Chapitos and formed their own thing. They're kind of lumped under this umbrella term called the Independent Cartel of Sonora. And they've been battling it out in Sonora, right, which is borders Arizona. And the reason why is they want that territorial control because of the human smuggling. That's one of the main reasons they really want that control. And this has been prior to this other civil war. This has been a civil war within Los Chapitos that has been extremely violent in Sonora. And you can directly tie that to not only the drugs and all other, but also to the human smuggling because they want that control. And the areas of violence, you can kind of tie it to the human smuggling networks and the routes that leverage it. And that's why they're fighting. Because they're all going to territorial. And that's something that when we look at, let's say, Narcos Mexico, we see the businessmen, and that still exists. But they're like, oh, well, you pay me this and we'll do money. And maybe we don't get an agreement. I'll kill you. But, hey, let's just move product and make money. That's changed. It's territory, 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 territory. That's what they care about.
Today's episode is brought to you by Fabric by Gerber Life. We're going to be talking about term life insurance. Before I even get into that, let's have a serious talk here for a second. Please have difficult conversations with your loved ones before something catastrophic happens. I understand that those conversations can kind of throw your mortality in your face. They can be difficult, and you may not want to talk through the what-ifs when it comes to catastrophe or the end of life. But I have been around enough of these situations, and I've seen two versions. One where people involved had these difficult conversations up front and they knew exactly the wishes and the desires and they had an infrastructure in place for when something happened. And another one where none of these things were discussed. And what ended up happening is people in a super emotionally compromised position are making really difficult decisions in an environment that they haven't been exposed to about things that they haven't really thought through. They're very different. It doesn't make it any easier, but one is, I would say, far more emotionally burdensome from a decision-making perspective and a logistical perspective than the other one. Have the conversations early, please. How does that tie into today's sponsor, Fabric by Gerber Life? Term life insurance. The older you get, you're going to have things that you care about, specifically family. I have 3 kids. I have a wife. I suffer from AGE, which is known as age. And at some point in time, my lap around the track is going to come to an end. And I can't think of anything that puts me more at ease than knowing that there is an infrastructure in place to take care of my wife and my kids. Now, I want to make this lap of mine as long as humanly possible, but I only have control over so much. But I can control everything that I put in place to protect them. And that, to me, is the value of life insurance. I have some bullet points in front of me that makes Fabric by Gerber Life a little bit unique. So I'm going to hit these just to make sure that the listener understands exactly what I'm talking about. All right, this is term life insurance you can get done right from your couch. You can do it all online and on your schedule. You could be covered in under 10 minutes with no health exam required. Fabric has flexible, high-quality policies that fit your family and your budget. As an example, $1 million in coverage for less than $1 a day. There's no risk. There's a 30-day money-back guarantee, and you can cancel at any time. And they have over 1,900 five-star reviews on Trustpilot with a rating of excellent. If this sounds like something that could be important to you and your life, you can join the thousands of parents who trust Fabric to help protect their family and apply today in just minutes at meetfabric.com/clearedhot. That's meetfabric.com/clearedhot. MEET, Mike Echo Echo Tango, fabric.com/clearedhot. Or you could just go down to the link in the show notes. Policies are going to be issued by Western Southern Life Assurance Company, not available in certain states. Prices are subject to underwriting and health questions. Let's get back to the show. Before we get into what the U.S. can potentially do, realistically, what do you think that Mexico could do? Say that they wanted to, and I'm not saying that they don't, but what are their actual viable options?
So I think I have an issue with this when people say, oh, the cartels are like, there's this Cato study that argued that somehow the cartels are have very similar capabilities to U.S. SOF. I'm like, all right, no.
I haven't seen any indication of that, and I'm going to follow that up by saying I don't look at this stuff very deeply.
No. I
Unless they, here's the thing, U.S. Special Operations, and I'll speak largely, generally is going to have a pretty robust selection program, a training pipeline, and a very specific orientation towards a mission set that they spend years of their life training towards. I've seen no indications of that from the cartels south of the border.
So very select units within the cartels, very few have that.
And which doesn't surprise me because on a small scale, you could do that.
Right. So, for example, before he was captured under Los Chapitos, the head of security, he was called El Nini. He had a very select group of people specifically that were, these guys are very well trained, very well armed. And one specific, they can cause pain. And don't get me wrong, the Mexican government, there are instances where they suffer casualties, obviously. Even their Tier 1, the Mexican Special Forces Tier 1 have been in battles where they suffer high levels of casualties. And you might get some reports here and there of Mexican police and getting ambushed and suffering high levels of casualties. But overall, as a whole, when you're analyzing this, the Mexican government and the Mexican military is a superior fighting organization than the cartels. The cartels might outgun the Mexican military. That, I think, is undisputable.
From a volume perspective, you mean?
From an armament perspective.
Oh, they have them outmatched, perhaps.
Correct.
Okay.
So they might outgun them, but the Mexican military makes up with that from training.
Yeah.
And generally, most of the times when the Mexican military and police are engaged in combat or clashes with Mexican cartels, regardless of who they are, generally the Mexican government and military come out top, and the police. They're just better trained.
It doesn't surprise me.
Yeah.
An organized, trained, and well-equipped force should be able to maneuver and overwhelm, and even if there was an overmatch in armament, if you have tactical knowledge and prowess, you should be able to do your job. That makes sense.
Yeah, and what I would say is there's also kind of a deliberate position within the Mexican government of not utilizing the tools they have to protect the soldier, and here's why. And so the Mexican government has APCs, obviously.
Armored personnel carriers.
Armored personnel carriers. I gotta start with
it's
the
all right.
acronym.
I'll hop in when needed. I got you.
But the problem but it's an image perspective from the Mexican government. Do they want their citizens to see Mexican tanks and armored personnel carriers in the cities that are at high levels of violence? So they generally will travel in pickup trucks. You know the famous scene of Sicario, the bridge scene where you've seen the Federales? And
yes.
That's their number one, 99.9% of the times when you see the Mexican military, police, National Guard on patrol, that's what they have. They don't use their armored personnel carriers.
On a side note, I love the movie Sicario. That scene that you're talking about, I've watched it enough times now that I'll start watching other people than the main actors. Mm-hmm. People listening, go back and watch Sicario. Whatever stuntmen that they had dressed up, they were hitting speed bumps at a high rate of speed, and those stuntmen were getting their asses absolutely handed to them in the back of those trucks, those poor bastards.
Yeah.
They're just bouncing around inside of those cages.
I mean, you got to give it. It's a phenomenal movie. I loved it.
One huge tactical issue, though, and God, this one drives me nuts. In that same border scene, you can pull this up, Michael. Sicario border scene. Do Sicario border scene bolt lock to the rear?
Okay.
I know exactly what you're talking
The dude
about.
with the glasses, he's up on his M4, and you're looking at it. You need to see the other side of the rifle.
I love though.
We'll
what was
get
that?
it there.
Who are they honoring in this? Oh,
I don't know.
it was the Delta. Oh my God, what's that guy's name? The guy with the glasses, the Delta Force operator.
I don't know who they were necessarily.
Yes, it
honoring.
was. Oh my God, I can't remember. And the comments are going to kill me.
Oh, you already missed it, Michael. Go backwards. Classic tactical asshole move. And this could have been caught in post, and they could have easily CGI'd it. It's the guy in front who we're going to be looking for.
With the glasses.
Yes.
Is this right before he kills him?
No, it's he. So his M4, there's a picture of it. Go to images, if you will, Michael.
Yeah.
That same guy, he's up on his gun, but his bolt is locked to the rear. It is, God, it drives me nuts. The movie is so good. And all they needed was one person to catch. And I know how the editing goes. Like somebody looking at it, they don't know. They could have easily CGI'd that bolt. Mm-hmm. It's going to be in, the top right. Top right.
Oh, there it is.
Yep. Enhance. Oh, yeah. Visit that shit.
That's the guy?
Yeah.
Is it? I think that's the guy that
Johnny,
they
we
were
were
trying
back on Twitter. You can barely see it. Yes, bolt lock to the rear. Damn it. It's not how you party, Michael. You see what I'm talking about?
Yeah, I see what you're talking
So,
about. Yeah.
to that point, though, about the kind of the tactics.
Yeah.
If you may, if you want to go to mine, because I have a video, I want to show this to point to your issues about doctrine and tactics and what the problem is. So if you want to go, All Source News.
All Source News.
Yeah. There it is. The guy with the tank. Okay. If you scroll down a little bit more. Okay. Okay. Click on that top one, the 50-second, that video. I don't know if I can stand up.
You can walk up there because what Michael can do is show the viewer what you're seeing on the TV.
So,
was that a tracer that just went out?
Right.
Yeah.
This is an up-armored vehicle.
Yep.
And you've seen the tracers flying through. You see that?
Yep.
What they're doing, because those up-armored vehicles are just civilian vehicles that they put metal.
Yeah.
The tracers is basically an M82 that they put on top, and it's a 50 cal, and they fire it, and they use that instead of, like, let's say, they do have machine guns like your M1919s or something like that. But for the most part, that's all they do. So they use these M82s or anti-material rifles. They put them on top of the vehicle, and they use it almost like a direct action weapon to fire directly at close range to defeat enemy vehicles. I don't know if you can scroll up. This is night. If you scroll up,
Michael can scroll up,
and you search on my tweets. I don't know if maybe. Is that if you scroll all the way up?
hit
Yeah,
that one
right there. The hourglass, and you try to put drone. Just do drone, and go to latest. Let me see. Scroll down. Let me see if I have it. I don't remember when I posted it. Wait, go up a little bit. I'm sorry. A little bit. Nope, keep on going. I don't know. I'd have to.
That was a DJI drone.
Oh yeah, they have that all the
Yeah.
time. Keep on going. Man, where is it? So what you'll see is
That's a crazy video right there in and of
yeah,
itself.
that's the CDN. So that's a Cartel de Noreste drone footage. Maybe instead of drone, put up armor.
Look at that. What pussies? They have it in standard mode. They need to put that in the manual mode so they can get more speed. I mean, come on, guys.
Up armor.
Armored. Sorry, ED. Yeah, and just search. I'm trying to see if I can find. Scroll down.
Please tell me they don't have a Blackhawk. That's what
No.
God.
I guess.
Is that one of those homemade up armored?
Yeah,
vehicles
that's
you're talking about?
exactly
Yep.
it. Not, Oh, you know what? It's up line armored, because there's this really good video, and I because that's night, and you can really see. No, sorry,
Like a dash.
and all together.
see.
Yeah, there you go. God, there's like one.
I appreciate, Michael, that you actually just wrote out lined when he said up-lined armor that you put outlined. I appreciate
very
it.
literal.
Yeah.
Go down. I really think it would be.
Well, regardless, I really recommend. Again, it's all underscore source underscore news. The videos that we're looking for people or looking through the people that are audio only are going to shock you.
That's it. Go up.
They're going to
Zoom
shock
that
you
up.
what they're showing. Holy shit.
So you can put it. You can even if you want to put. See right there. You see how they're shooting directly at it.
That's at a distance. I'm going to call that 7 yards.
So that's what they do. So there's a previous video.
Michael,
actually,
pause that. My man has no respect for backblast and splash black. Let me just tell you, that man is hucking rounds at an armored vehicle. I'm going to hope he has iPro on.
No.
Okay. Well,
No Ear Pro. That doesn't exist.
Ear Pro and iPro, I'm going to tell you right now, there's some safety violations happening on this two-way range. My man is hucking large caliber rounds at an armored vehicle at a distance where they might just be coming back to bite him.
So you see that, if I'm not mistaken, this was the first part, and then there's a second part. But you see how in the front it has like a battering ram?
Yeah.
They rammed that vehicle, turned around, and then so you can see that single. That's the M82.
Yeah.
They use it almost as an anti-tank capability because they don't necessarily have RPGs.
Oh my God.
As in large quantities. So that's literally what they do.
If they're not wearing Ear Pro, they will never hear anything again. Now, let me ask you this. Who's flying that drone? Is it their own guys kind of making some combat footage?
Yeah, if you go back, if you just exit out, and I can probably read you. I'm trying to think. If you zoom up, maybe. I obviously put it in the text. Scroll right there. So, video showing CDN clashing with Metros and Frontera Chica area in Tamaulipas. You can observe how the CDN up armor vehicle uses an AMR to destroy the Metro vehicle. So, this is a Cartel de Noreste fighting against the Metros. So, if you look at McAllen, Texas, Reynosa, and then if you go all the way to Laredo, that's the CDN Metro fight, that area of Mexico, and that's what they do.
Are we talking banging it out on the daily?
So for example, almost daily, yes. And so there's another one, for example, so the Sinaloa Cartel Civil War is daily. That's a daily thing in Sinaloa. So the Gulf Cartel is split. Just as I said, there was a civil war. The Gulf Cartel is split between Grupo Escorpión and the Metros. They kind of split. Metros are basically allied with CG&G. Grupo Escorpión is their own thing. They're out of Matamoros, which borders Brownsville, Texas. Metros and Grupo Escorpión, it's like every day, specifically in an area in Tamaulipas called Rio Bravo. It's between Reynosa and Matamoros. Like every night, every day, nonstop. And it's right at the border, like nonstop. That's where if you see like sometimes the Texas DPS has like drone footage that showed these guys battling.
That actually goes back to Sicario, the first one as well. They invite the woman up to the rooftop after the border scene, actually, and they're looking back out into Mexico, and you start seeing the tracer fire, and you hear explosions.
So this specific area, that's one. Other areas I see almost daily fighting, Zacatecas, another state. There's kind of, and they fight, and these guys also fight like in remote areas. But you have Mayito Flaco against CG&G. That's almost daily in Zacatecas. Chiapas, which borders Guatemala down in southern Mexico. That is Mayito Flaco versus CG&G, specifically a front of CG&G called the Cartel de Chiapas en Guatemala. So the Chiapas and Guatemala cartel, it's a front of CG&G. They fight in Chiapas. I can go on. Michoacán. You have Carteles Unidos and CG&G. Actually, CG&G, and I swear to God, these guys exist, the Viagra cartel.
You stop it right now.
I swear to it.
Is there emoji a blue pill?
And I would have to look into that, maybe. That would be an interesting thing.
It's a really wasted opportunity if it's not.
But they're actually... CG&G and Viagra cartel launched a massive offensive in Michoacan this weekend. Huge offensive.
Is there a reason they chose Viagra? Is there a topographical or geographical something in Mexico, or did they just have the worst branding marketer ever?
They don't care. I haven't seen these guys in a while. I think they're defunct, but there used to be a Taliban cartel.
Any associations?
Nope.
Okay, I was going to say.
And there's a faction of the Mayito Flaco is called the Russians. No affiliation with Putin. That's because the guy's nickname, their leader's nickname is El Ruso, the Russian. So how do you track them? They use the Russian emoji flag, and they love communist emojis, as USSR, Russian propaganda emoji. Like they don't care about Russia. They don't, but they heavily use it just because sometimes it's a joke. There's other guys called Los Alemanes, the Germans. The head of El Chapito, his name is Perris. That's his nickname, Perris, which is a kind of like sounds very similar to Paris. So he uses the French flag because of that. That's I'm telling you, that's
this is insane.
Yep. Yeah.
So what can the Mexican government do? Could they solve it if they wanted to?
So I think what they're running into is a lack of resources, both in the military and a lack of resources and desires in the judiciary. Now, here's the problem that when we're talking about the Mexican cartels. From a Mexican, this is where I was talking about the U.S. perspective. The Mexican cartels, the Mexican government's probably number one interest is security and stability for its citizens.
That's fair.
Sometimes that means you got to go after a specific cartel, like the Zetas historically. Okay, these guys have gotten out of control. We got to go after them. Enough is enough. Okay. And sometimes it's, well, if we go after them and we weaken them, violence goes up. Because I can tell you right now, the Mexican government is not happy that the U.S. extradited Maya Zambada because they knew exactly the violence in Sinaloa was going to skyrocket as a result.
Do you think this is obviously a hypothesis, do you think the Mexican government, if they had wanted to, could have grabbed him, but they didn't because they understood the lack of stability that would have come from that?
It depends who you ask. And I know that's a cop-out. I'm sorry.
No, we're down kind of like a rabbit hole thought process here.
I love it.
No, I mean, it's the same conversation that some people will have around Afghanistan. Mm-hmm. Do you go and do you roll up the tribal warlord, who is a heavy-fisted motherfucker, and pull him out of there and punish him for the things that he's done, and then have to deal with the consequences of people fighting in that vacuum because now somebody's trying to establish himself? Mm-hmm. Or do you let the guy, you know what I mean? And I don't know how to balance those
both.
Scales because,
both.
you're putting your finger on one of those either way. And at the end of the day, it kind of terminates in violence. Yeah, it's a Faustian choice for sure.
So that's the interest. So obviously, the U.S. government is the weakening of the cartel. That's our national security interest. We made that abundantly clear, but that doesn't sometimes overlap with the Mexicans. Now, I can make an easy argument from a U.S. perspective and national security perspective. The Sinaloa cartel is the weakest it's ever been since its inception.
Now, is that due to, though, their infighting?
And the loss of their leadership and because of the infighting.
Okay.
Yes, absolutely. But from a U.S. national security point of view, they've, even those Chapitos, right? They've lost Joaquin Guzman. They've lost one of the brothers. They lost Ovidio Guzman, one of the brothers. Oh, funny story. Pixie and Dixie the mouse? The cartoon? Pixie?
I do not watch cartoons, sir.
You don't?
How old is your daughter?
Man, this was a long time ago. Yeah, actually, Google, I think it's called Pixie and Dixie, the mouse.
Make sure you do this under your browser again, Michael. I don't know what the hell we're getting ourselves into here.
No, it's a cartoon. Look at those mouses right there. You see them in the right? You never seen that show when you were a kid?
Wait a minute. Isn't that... I feel like I've watched a mouse show with a cat, but I didn't realize it had the name Pixie and Dixie.
You're thinking, I think, Tom and Jerry.
Yes, I've watched Tom and Jerry.
This is another one. This is a different one.
Is this the Tom and Jerry knockoff?
Probably.
Okay.
So the reason why I say that, Ovidio Guzman, his call sign was one of those mouses because they called him El Raton, the rat. But not like because he was a rat, like the mouse.
Yeah.
El Raton. I swear to you, there's an image of like a police badge, and on top of the police badge is that mouse. Because that's his call sign. And so his emoji is sometimes like a mouse emoji. So that was Ovidio Guzman.
All right.
So he was detained. El Nini, the head of security of Los Chapitos, was detained. So and then, now you had, prior to this civil war, the other civil war I was talking about in Sonora, so they were definitely getting weaker and weaker and weaker and weaker. So from a U.S. point, why were they targeting Los Chapitos? Because they were key in the fentanyl trade. And it was funny, the Sinaloa cartel did this whole we're banning fentanyl trafficking and we're going to kill people who do it. We're no longer trafficking. They did target independent fentanyl traffickers, but they still pushed. Anybody who took that as face value was lying. I
was going to say, I feel like what they said was, we'll just kill anybody that's not us.
So they used it as a propaganda. Exactly. And that's what they did. Because while he was doing that, I was talking to a good friend of mine who's a journalist. And he's like, and because we were like, dude, this is absolute BS. Nobody's going to believe this. And he's like, no, he's pushing a huge load of fentanyl to the U.S. right now because he needs the money, because he had this pet, Ivan Archibaldo, the head of Los Chapitos, you can argue, had this pet project of his key and security aspect that he wanted, and he needed the money now. So he's pushing fentanyl while they were killing independent fentanyl traffickers, saying, oh, we're not going to traffic fentanyl. That was a lie.
Let me ask you this. The cartels, another thing that I have when it comes to fentanyl specifically, quite a few episodes, and you can go upstream with this all the way to China and the source chemicals. And there's a conversation around, well, do they know that this combination of chemicals that isn't being necessarily sold together, that happens to be ending up at a Mexican port, that may be offloaded by somebody that looks like a military-age male Chinese soldier that is then handed over to the cartels at some point? What's the relationship there at a geopolitical level between... My understanding is well, let me ask it through the lens of a question. It's an open secret that the precursor chemicals are coming from China. Are the Chinese mixing it, or are they handing it to the cartels and they are mixing it, so they are creating through precursor and then distributing? Where does that handoff occur?
So I think it's both. But for the most part, what I've seen is they get the precursors from China, and then they do the drug laboratories are in
Mexico.
In Mexico.
Okay.
And these are not, I mean, I think people think about drug laboratories like this, like Breaking Bad.
Oh, no, from my understanding, we're talking like level 5 gear, pristine.
Ooh.
Really?
Vast majority of drug labs that are seized by the Mexican government. And, they upload that also on Instagram. I have a ton of videos of drug labs. And narco, and these are the most rudimentary, basic things you can ever think of. I mean, I don't know if you can find it in mine. Like if you go to Ulcers and you put like drug laboratory, and maybe you see these are basic.
So we're talking bathtub meth here, not Breaking Bad meth. Okay.
Yeah. Right. This is not sophisticated, high class level. And they upload this on their social medias. They're like, oh, look, we're making drugs. That's what you see them doing. All right, if you know where to look, you can. It's not that hard to either buy guns or drugs just using an Instagram account. It is not hard. If you know where to look, you can.
What does it say about me that I feel like Instagram is just a place to put up weird pictures of your dog?
Well, I wish it was just that.
I mean, I don't know. I'm behind the times.
Right there. Clandestine drug lab right there.
Oh, we're going to play that video. I mean, that looks pretty OSHA approved. I feel like that's good ventilation. That's outside. That's strong. Wooden spoon, perhaps. Yeah, there's probably no crossover of chemical there. It doesn't absorb anything. Just being stored in the steam.
So that's a region in Sinaloa.
Yeah.
Barigaguato.
That's an OSHA level 5 lab right there. I don't know what you guys are talking about. Holy shit.
There's a work. I mean, he has gloves. I'll give him that. I think maybe he has a face breathing mask. But yeah, that's how they do it. That's it. Look, a little fan right there. And no mask. No mask. He did not have a mask.
No iPro either. But there's probably no spill or splash hazard or damage at all.
That's it.
I don't see how anybody in this day and age. I've never struggled with addiction. So what I'm about to say is without judgment, because I've never been somebody who's been in the grasp of addiction. But even anybody using prescription drugs that they're buying off the street recreationally, I don't see how anyone feels comfortable buying anything, given that the people that I talk to say basically 100% of street drugs that are bought, they're knockoffs, and the large majority of them contain fentanyl, which will fucking kill you dead.
I mean,
what a risk, man.
It's a risk, yeah. But, either addiction or just you want to party and have fun. But yeah, I mean, that's.
I like to party and have fun. I don't like to wake up dead.
I will say 2024, there's been a lot of countries announcing, at least cocaine-wise, record seizures of cocaine as well. I mean, that we've seen a mass increase of cocaine.
Yeah.
But, what I think, we're kind of going here and here. But to your point earlier about the Mexican government and what they can do, you have the resources availability, you have the judiciary. But it goes back to the priorities that sometimes weakening a cartel might not be in their national interest, because right now Mexico, right, because they have a huge problem with Sinaloa right now, the violence there. And so you can make an argument, I can make an easy argument that if Trump demands Mexico, you will secure the border. And so Mexico, let's say, complies. So they deploy military forces to the border. Well, now you don't have military forces to secure
Sinaloa,
Chiapas, Guanajuato, all these other regions. And guess who fills the vacuum? The cartels. And so that goes to the lack of resources. Now, if you're analyzing this from the U.S., I mean, you can make an argument. Again, cartels are not near peer to the Mexican military. Sometimes they outgun them. We have tactics. The Mexican military has tactics. Now, yes, again, if the U.S. military goes in, are we going to suffer casualties? Probably. Yeah, I think it would be absurd to say not to. But this idea that the U.S. military can't handle them, I think, is laughable.
There have been some people saying the internet's a weird place, man. Anybody can make any content they want to, and I'm actually here for it. Like, go to town, make whatever content you want. There's some people out there saying, if we send our tier 1 units out there, they're going to get their asses kicked. And
how many videos do you want to see before I convince you otherwise of cartel members fighting? I will. We can. You can see
what you said is correct though, because two-way ranges, they just don't really care, and even a blind pig finds mud every once in a while.
Exactly.
So even a guy firing up in the air with an AK, there's going to be casualties of some. Does that mean that they are capable, or like you said, a near peer? I don't think so.
No.
I think there's a lot of romanticizing about the violence and capability. Mm-hmm. And I don't know. I mean, there's nothing that can be done about that. I would hope they don't make foreign policy based off of that.
So what I would say, one of the things we're noticing that the cartels are doing is, I mean, they are training, but you see the training videos and they're like, okay, like, come on, man, that's not. And, again, are there certain units, like I said earlier, yes, that can be, okay, if you're a tier 1 operator, again, they're not near peer to you, but are you like, okay, guys, like this is, any engagement.
I have a better solution for that though. Mm-hmm. And it's called a Reaper drone with a 500-pounder.
Now the question is, are you in a civilian, highly densely civilized area?
Well, because I'm a gentleman, I would of course wait until they're isolated on a motorcycle or in a vehicle by themselves.
And that could be a tactic, right? That could be a legitimate tactic. And if I were, and I said this in other podcasts and episodes and conversations, where it's like, if I'm a DoD planner, right, and I'm advising the SecDev and an O plan, or maybe Northcom. Right. Okay. Because Mexico's under the U.S. Northern Command, Northcom. Let's say I'm advising, I'm a planner. My priority targeting would be these, not only the leadership, but kind of the faction leadership. These key guys that I mentioned earlier. That's who I would
heads of the snake, if you will,
or even a little bit below.
Neck up.
Yeah. So because that's like the head of the snake is El Mencho, right? I'd be looking. Yeah. Let's get El Mencho and all that. But I was like, Jardinero, right in Nayarit. Double R, I think he's in Guanajuato, right? Those are some of those guys. There's another guy called Commander 88 in Tabasco, in a region of Tabasco. Like those are the guys, like, okay, because those are the guys that really, in a lot of ways, control the men. Now, those guys can be replaced, but okay, now we're losing capability, degradation, leadership, et cetera. That's kind of what I would be looking at. I think the best solution, and I think the U.S. government can handle it. The question then becomes mission creep. Now we're kind of chewing off more than biting more than we can chew. Are we going to declare all cartels foreign terrorist organizations? Okay, now that's okay. I mean, if the Mexican government has been doing this almost for 20 years, and I don't think anybody's going to make an argument it's getting better. If anything, violence is getting worse and it's spreading. A third of Mexico, the last U.S. intelligence assessment was that a third of Mexico was directly under cartel control. A third of their country. Now, a lot of them is in remote areas.
Yeah.
But a third
That's
of
a large
them,
number. You got to add to that too. Even, so say that there is Northcom planners, they agree that, maybe we don't want to send U.S. boots on the ground. So we will target these things. I mean, there still is the aspect as well as, even though we have designated the cartels as a foreign terrorist organization, you're still striking in a sovereign nation attached to our southern border that on paper is our ally. That's a complicated issue as well.
Right, exactly. I mean, I haven't even touched that, and that's your bring up point. And Mexicans are very proud of their country, as they should be, and they're very national, and they have a lot of respect to the military.
Yeah.
And I train them. These guys know what they're doing. Yeah, there's instances where something happened, or maybe, but for the most part, compared to what I've seen in the Middle East, I was like, dude, I'll take a Mexican soldier any day. And these guys are very good at urban warfare and guerrilla tactics, et cetera, and all that, and trying to find out, because they deal with it in an everyday. The issue that they're running into is that cartels are, for example, the State Department, I think this weekend or a couple of days ago, put a level 4 do not travel notice for.
I just saw that, yes.
In Tamaulipas, and one of the things they said is because of increased use of IEDs, which we've seen, they're increasing IEDs, and we're also seeing an increased use of, kind of like Russia, Ukraine, drones dropping explosives. And one of the interesting aspects is, not across the board, I mean, it's not complicated, right? I mean, any cartel can get it. Like the Familia Michoacana, that's another cartel out of Guerrero. They're in a conflict in Guerrero against those telacos, they're called, another gang. the Familia Michoacana is notorious for like just drones after drone. And the problem you're running into is a lot of it doesn't get reported because it happens in remote areas you don't know until way after the fact. But they are, it's still very rudimentary, right? It's not like what we see in Iraq or Israel, right? Where they have like an FPV drone or like a Group 2, 3 UAS going straight. No, it's just here's a drone dropping a grenade. But one of the interesting aspects, because people will say, well, these guys are trained by special forces, the cartels will say, oh, and there's all these reports. Yeah, got it. But it's not nowhere close because one thing we see is Colombian, for example, Colombians are highly recruited by Mexican cartels, Colombian veterans in the military, highly recruited. We actually see them a lot in Michoacan. Some of these guys I've tracked probably, there's some accounts of we tracked them. Maybe I can think of specifically maybe 3 instances of a Colombian soldier who fought for the Ukrainians against Russians that then went to Mexico and just was bought off by the Mexican cartels to fight for them or to train them.
Really?
Yeah. So you track their
soldier for hire. Yeah, I get it.
Then that's what they do, right?
Honestly, that's a profession as old as time.
And so you see that, and you are. I think one of the aspects when people criticize the war on drugs and like, oh, we're militarizing. And my counter to that and why I say all this is the cartels are militarizing. Like you can say we shouldn't militarize the war on drugs. Well, the cartels already are, and they don't really care what you think. They're seizing territory. They have a heart and mind strategy and a terror campaign. I mean, we haven't even talked about some of the decapitation videos in the terror campaign and the hearts and messaging. Like in Mexico they celebrate the Day of the Kid, Dia de los Niños. Every year, you see the cartels releasing videos across social media saying, look at the gifts we're giving. Mother's Day, look at the gifts we're giving. They have, all the kids come and all the mothers run and they give them gifts and money and cash. CG&G in Michoacan was very effective of trying to, as we mentioned about the avocado farmers and the lime farmers that were targeted. They were like, look at this violent cartel, Carteles Unidos, they're targeting you. And CG&G wasn't wrong in this. CG&G said, oh, Carteles Unidos are extorting you and your farms and your limes, and the Mexican government, the Mexican military is supporting Carteles Unidos, fighting CG&G, because I have videos of Carteles Unidos and the Mexican soldiers or policemen fighting side by side against CG&G. So CG&G would then go to the farmers to see, look, even the Mexican government is against you, and they're helping these extortionists, taking your crops, taking your money. Help us, and we'll protect you. Very effective campaign.
Full IO campaign, just running it.
And terror campaign.
I was going to say that let's get into the beheadings. Michael's favorite. He's over there like, what?
So
his Google search history is probably felonious in nature.
That I don't, I don't post that. Those get edited out. I don't post that because it's
some things are probably best to let people use their imagination. If you've seen one of those, you have probably seen enough.
So it's interesting, the execution videos. One of the interesting aspects, and like I'm going to kind of guesstimate, but 90% of execution videos that I've seen, generally they're actually very hyper local focused. The messaging, so they'll get a guy, they'll detain him, his hands up and say, and then the guy's recorder is like, say your name, I don't know, Jesus, blah blah blah. Who do you work for? I work for this guy in this cartel. Who supports you? Well, this local says the name police commander and his deputy and the deputy mayor, that unless you're from that region, you have no idea who those people are. Like, nobody's like, oh, who are these people? But very hyper focus. And they kind of frame it in a way where it's almost like a lot of times they even say like, oh, like one cartel will tell another cartel, like, oh, you're the extortionist. You're the one who's robbing the people and we're killing you to, as a form of justice, because Mexico, like 90+% of homicide cases don't even get investigated, right? Or crimes don't even get reported. There's a huge problem in that. And so the cartels most of the times are very hyper-focused and local in their messaging for the local population. Most of the times the decapitation videos are very crude. They're very just basic brunt, right? Axe, chop off the legs, chop off the head, chop off, the body, whatever. Burning somebody alive or just shooting them, very basic. But there are one specific group that reminds me because you can almost look at all these execution videos. I mean, they're just violent and like you can. I mean, I think it's a fair comparison, like ISIS.
Yeah, the
right?
beheading videos. Yeah,
and they'll hang the bodies, and they'll either dismember bodies or an ice cooler, so you open it with a message. And they're all again local, but there's one specific that I haven't seen in a while. But these guys were different. These guys, so CDN, who I talked about, they actually called themselves, if I'm not mistaken, Operativo Texas, so Texas operative of CDN. I have the video. I'm not going to explain it. I will spare your listeners even a audio description or a visual description of that. If you want to see it, feel free. But the way they did it was horribly, like the most gruesome execution video I've ever seen, but it was almost like this medical precision how they did it.
Really drew it out.
And you just don't do that. Like if I were to tell you to do the things they did, you wouldn't know how to do it.
Huh.
I'll give a broad overview. Basically, they removed the skin from the person's face so you can see the skull.
This person's alive, by the way.
He was alive. And hold on, I'm not done. They opened the chest, took out the heart, and you can see the heart beating in the video. And it was a CDN execution video. Explain to me, how do you do that without some medical training? Like perfectly removing everything, the scalp, the face, the
Where do you
front.
even get that idea from?
Because it's a terror campaign, right? That serves two purposes, either to instill terror or, more importantly, normalize it. So that when these events happen, people don't care. They're not going to demand a change. That's what they do. It's become part of society. That now nobody's going to be held accountable for it. But that specific execution video, I think they wanted to send a message of their power and their strength and their brutality. And trust me, the message was received. That was one of the few times where I was like, okay, I need a break.
Yeah.
I need to step out. I need to take a break because it was a level of precision and it wasn't brute force that caught my attention. And I haven't seen them recently. So I don't know if they were targeted, they were captured, maybe they were rounded up by coincidence and they never tied them up. They've been dormant, they've been quiet for a while, but that was one. But the execution and decapitation videos, it just is so normalized now in Mexico that I literally, unless the app, the data stream with Artorias I was mentioning picks it up, I would have to look for it.
Wow.
Because we have our app scouring a lot of sources everywhere. Sometimes it's like a fourth page back in the newspaper or the website. Oh yeah, there was 3 bodies were left hanging in this bridge somewhere.
It's tough to describe how much violence would have to occur on the daily for that to be something that is white noise. Not only the violence, but the missing. I think there's like way over 100,000 people declared missing in Mexico. Are we talking annually?
No, total.
Okay.
Total.
Holy shit, that's a big number.
No, total. So like when they track just people missing in Mexico that they have no idea, and mass graves. I think last week, a mass grave, they found 50 bodies in Mexico.
So let me ask you this. I mean, what you're describing in Mexico, again, is a level of violence that I have heard, and it shouldn't be romanticized, in my opinion, at least, at all. Let's talk north of the border and the influence. What is your estimation?
Mm-hmm.
TDA is one thing, like you said, a Venezuelan gang. They've been pretty aggressive in their expansion. But these other organizations that you're talking about that have their roots in Mexico, they're geographically oriented now as opposed to being more transactional. What level of infiltration do you think they have of individuals in the U.S., and how tightly are they monitoring the behavior that occurs north of the border? Because that shit would draw... I don't know, and I'm thankful for this, I don't think that Americans would ever get to a place where beheadings would be white noise.
Correct. And
so that type of behavior, right, is like, okay, we've now crossed this border. You do that stuff, you are going to get the eye of Sauron on your ass, and you're going to get annihilated. So I'm curious, who do they allow to come north, and what kind of marching orders do those people have with them?
So... funny enough, a lot of my God, I don't know if it was El Mencho's son. I had to look it up. He was I think they faked his death when he went north of the border to be with his girlfriend, and that's how they caught him, because he wanted to be with his girlfriend.
I mean, I can understand the desire.
Yeah. Oh, trust me. You want to capture a cartel leader? Don't look for the cartel leader. Look for his girlfriend or his wife or his mistresses on Instagram. Dude.
Stop it. What's the emoticon for mistress? A rose?
Dude, they are everywhere. Like, I don't need to track the guy. Just if you find out the girlfriend, you're 99% there to catching this guy. So north of the border. Yeah, now again, cartels generally do business, and how they do it is with local gangs, and because then they get the drugs. And yeah, there's people in there's cartels. Not, I don't think in very large numbers, because a lot of them is now they sell to a specific gang.
Well, you wouldn't want a large footprint.
Exactly.
If you're thinking about this operationally, you would want the smallest footprint possible.
Yeah.
And like you said, you have key influencers or people that you work with. Like, we'll get this to you, but at this point, you give me some cash or Bitcoin or whatever they're using, and it's on you. Yeah, you don't want to get rolled up with the product.
So what I would say is, one of the funny things is, I think when I talked about this in space, because the conversation was, if the U.S. attacks Mexico cartels, right, what is kind of the repercussions in the United States? And I would say, yes. Do we might see some level of attacks in the U.S.? Do we might see Border Patrol agents now being more targeted? Do we see maybe some border communities more targets and stuff like that? Okay, you know what? I think that's within the realm of possibility. But this idea of like this mass insurgency, massive terrorist attacks, like, no, come on, that's not how they operate. North of the border, like south of the border, I said territorial. North of the border, transactional. Transactional. And
I think they would have to be to survive.
yeah, and the typical cartel person north of the border is not like this macho military age male. It's a businessman. It's a car dealership that does money laundering for the cartels. It's a lawyer.
Legitimate up front, but dirty back end.
Yeah. And there's certain aspects of certain guys who might be hitmen or of course, but like, it's not the large number. It's the infrastructure in place to handle a multi-billion-dollar industry, both in the US and Mexico, right? The financial aspects in the US, a lot of it. Yeah, again, are there specific members that are of course, and are sometimes can violence cross over? Of course. But that's not really the image north. It's a lot of businesses that are necessary for them to launder money or to even traffic and do human smuggling or drug trafficking or whatever it may be. And that's really what is north of the border, because for the US, I wouldn't analyze the threat necessarily north of the border. That will increase. I think that it would be unwise of me to say there's no increase.
Yeah.
It will. But if I'm an American, again, Northcom planner, my concern isn't necessarily inside the US. No. My concern is the American citizens living in Mexico. Because now the cartel says, that's fair game. You're targeting our leadership. You're conducting airstrikes inside Mexico.
We're going to target you.
We're going to target your American citizens. Because now you've done two things. There's like 1.6 million American citizens living in Mexico. So do they start targeting them as a retaliation? And then two, which I think more conversations should have about this. We did a podcast. We have our own podcast called Bluff Artorias. And one of the hosts, Matthew, we were talking about the Mexican cartels, and he made a distinction between grievance and greed in kind of like an insurgency aspect for motivation. Are they driven by grievance, so like a political motivation, or are they driven by greed, which is a money? Obviously, most people would say for Mexican cartels fall under the greed. If U.S. military start conducting operations into Mexico, let's say unilateral, do you now give them that grievance aspect that changes them into at least to have on paper up front, which hasn't existed really, but a political motivation now? And do they then, the terror tactics we've seen directed against Mexican citizens inside Mexico, do they then leverage that against American citizens inside of Mexico? Because one thing is like you're driving down the highway and you get accidentally targeted, or people think, the cartel kills Americans. And most of the times it's just a guy who just wants some money, is just a simple robber or something, right? It's not this guy. Most of the times, even cartels have a general understanding, hey, don't mess with Americans. Do not mess with Americans. I think if you remember in a couple years ago, the 2 Americans that were killed and 2 were kidnapped when they crossed the border.
Yes, I do. I don't remember the specific details, but I remember hearing quite a bit about this.
So when the cartel, it was Grupo Escorpión out of Matamoros. They went for plastic surgery, the Americans. They thought they were Haitian smugglers, I believe. They thought they were Haitian smugglers, so they attacked them. So they killed 2 and they kidnapped 2. When they realized they were Americans, they were like, oh, shit. We messed up. What they did is not only did they tell the Mexican government, go here, You will find the Americans here. Go get them. But then everybody who was involved in the operation that killed those Americans, they lined them up, handcuffed them, and then they put a note basically saying, hey, America, our bad. We had no idea they were Americans. These guys were responsible for them. They're yours.
That is a pretty strong signal as to how much they want to stay off the radar.
So
perhaps not off the radar, off the wrong side of the field.
So can Americans get targeted? Of course. And we saw it in the case with the Mormons where they were targeted. Like, again, but from a general rule of thumb, they even understand, okay, be careful. If you're going to target an American, you better have a valid reason or be careful. Be very, very, very careful. If the U.S. starts conducting operations inside Mexico, that deterrence is gone. Because that's the thought process, right? Like, oh, we don't want to target Americans because the Americans would come after us. Well, if you're already targeting us, the deterrence is gone. So is that a threat? And that's what I would be more concerned about. I'm not saying it's a given, it's a fact, but do they start targeting Americans in Mexico and then tying it with even a political nationalistic message? I'm not saying it's a given, it's going to happen for sure, but that's something I would seriously analyze and consider.
Yeah, that's a fair talking point for sure. That is something that has to go into the geometry of making those decisions for military action in Mexico. Do you think there's a world, I mean, we can talk about possible versus probable, but a world where, is it even possible to eradicate the cartels in Mexico? Or is that something that people should probably put out of their vernacular and focus on something more plausible?
I mean, yeah, I would, it's probably, I mean, I think you can, I think it's possible where you at least empower the Mexican government to have full territorial control of their country and maybe reform as best as possible their judiciary and their political process to really clamp down on corruption. Because again, a lot of this is also because of the Mexican state. I think that's a possible scenario, but you would have to put a lot of effort for that. In the short term, no. But there would have to be a lot of focus, and I think the military aspect of it really misses out on everything else. And I don't think there's a political will in this country, in the United States, to really address this at the root, which is not only empowering the Mexican government, and maybe we get into agreement with Mexico in bilateral aspects, right? Maybe an SFAB, a Security Forces Assistant Brigade, I think is the acronym, right? The Army guys who goes and do advises and assist. That's within the realm of possibility. There's a lot of things that we can do, but there's a lot more than just the military dynamic of this that I don't think we're going to have a really serious conversation to really address it in the United States.
Well, what would you say to your average citizen in the United States who has probably heard of the word cartel, maybe even heard of things like TDA? Because I think we can agree, and just in what you were describing, this is not a simple issue that you could encapsulate on a single piece of paper. There are spider webs going in so many different directions, whether it's history inside of these regions, history between the organizations inside of these regions, why they're infighting, why they're exterior fighting, what's their motivation. Like you said, is it for holding terrain or transactional? So there's a government response that is going to have to be figured out from a policy perspective. What would your advice be to just your average citizen who is left completely out of a policy perspective? What do you think is important that they understand and know about the cartel? And are cartels, subject writ large, somebody in Montana who's worried about TDA? What do you do? Right? You have no policy. You have no impact on policy personally. I guess you could call your senator or congressman. I'm not so sure how much that does. They're worried about it. What the hell do you do?
I mean, I think, that's a very good question. That's a really good question. I've never really thought about that. What I would say is, I think first, knowledge is power, obviously.
Yeah,
right?
educate yourself as to what is real and what isn't, because there is some bullshit out there too.
Yeah. Like I would say, the first thing I'd say, I understand. I mean, we said it cartels, but that's not it's not a singular organization. It's a very complex. There's multiple, and they all fight. But if you're really, at least from an American citizen point of view, and you're like, well, how can I impact or maybe have a change is something that is concerning, and maybe areas that you can is something we kind of talked about a little bit briefly. You were talking about addiction, right? I mean, look, we talked about how drugs is not the only thing they traffic, right? It's not legalizing drug or whatever is going to solve the Mexican cartel problem set. But it'll help address it, right? I think if we have a serious conversation, and I think that has to be pushed by the American people, of acknowledging, number one, that we have a drug addiction problem, we have a drug consumption problem, and that's fueling the violence. It's not the only thing, but it's definitely a huge part of it.
Yeah, you can't just focus on the supply.
You have to focus on the demand.
Yeah.
And the demand is not going to solve it, but it will address and I think it's a net positive regardless. We don't want American citizens dying because of fentanyl overdose or cocaine overdose or heroin overdose. And the thing is, like, it impacts everybody. It doesn't matter, red, blue state, Republican, Democrat, Independent, it doesn't matter, right? Heroin addictions really impacted the Rust Belt, rural America, a lot of the industrial heartland, right? Areas, and then just like crack cocaine impacted, urban America during the 80s and 90s. And so I think as an American citizen, that maybe areas that you can have an impact is how can we address the drug addiction, both, because of pharmaceutical pushing, drugs that are highly addictive that got people hooked to those, to heroin and stuff like that, right? But also just that aspect and really demand that when we're talking about military operations against the cartels, saying, wait a minute, there's something we can do here in America for our citizens that for whatever reasons are suffering a drug addiction, and is it the best policy to throw them in jail? Or is there something else we can do? Whatever the solution is, demand that, right? Because in the end of the day, for you, the Mexican cartels, TDA, MS-13, like the United States is a pretty strong country. We have a very strong law enforcement, strong capabilities. I'm like I said earlier, I'm not concerned about a TDA drive-by shooting, killing people. I'm not saying it's impossible, but we have very robust capabilities to really address that, right? And when we see them kind of happen up, maybe it's crazy and, hey, go after them, shut them down, do whatever you need. But really for an American citizen, that's what I would say. Like, don't necessarily focus on the Mexican cartels per se. Yeah, I'm all here to educate you and help you, but demand change and find ways that maybe you can help the consumption demand side in this country. That's what I would recommend.
Let's say we're able to do that. We put on our magic hats and wands and we wave our wand and we are able to drastically impact demand. What do you think that the cartel would lateral to? How do they replace that cash?
They would find a way. They would get maybe legitimate. They would find something. Like they are a very adept organization. You don't become... I mean, if these guys would easily be a Fortune, then probably even within the Fortune 100, not even 500.
I mean, they are running complex, multi-level, disaggregate, international business. Granted, layer in all the other shit that they're doing that falls underneath that definition. Mm-hmm. It's not that it's simple. That's for sure.
No, it's not.
Yeah, I wonder if they would lateral even more into the...
I think they would become...
more white-collar versus blue-collar crime.
Both of that, but my concern would be, because I had this conversation about... It was kind of, remember a while back, I was having this conversation about this idea of legalization of drugs. And I made the argument that what they would probably try to do is, if they were already territorial now, they would focus more on the territorial aspect. And so... that's why it has to be kind of this two-pronged approach in a lot of aspects, even the demand. But that's why I also believe the Mexican cartels are becoming more territorial, because they realize and understand that if they're transactional in and of itself, if their logistics is disrupted in the pushing of drugs, they're screwed. They have a problem. I don't know if you saw, there was in Colombia, in the border region of Colombia, there was the Ejército Liberación Nacional, the ELN terrorist organization, and a FARC dissident group in a border area of Colombia and Venezuela was in a huge fight right now. They're fighting very heavily along the Colombian-Venezuelan border.
I did not see that.
Yeah, so that's a huge problem right now for Colombia, the President Petro, which I think got drowned out because of this, just the migrant deportation, which is just, again, is frustrating. That people focus more on that. I was like, no, there's actually like an actual conflict. And the reason why I say that It's not 100% confirmed, but there's this belief, and there's some reporting to back it up, that the reason why the fighting skyrocketed is I believe specifically the French Navy seized 9 tons of cocaine in the Caribbean Sea. 9 tons. It's a massive seizure.
That's a hell of a party.
There's a belief that that loss of the drugs caused the violence to happen between the FARC dissidents and ELN, because they're now there's that territorial aspect, because the transactional dropped. Now we need to focus on the territorial. I think that would happen in Mexico. So again, it's this two-pronged approach in the United States. Actually, it should be a multiple-pronged approach, but empowering the Mexican government, the resources and everything to ensure that they can prevent that territorial aspect of the Mexican cartels.
Any way we slice it, this is a multi-year, complex, slow-moving needle towards progress.
Have you tracked anything on Haiti? The developments in Haiti?
Broadly, I would say. Are you talking about a specific issue here?
Well, just the gangs, the gang violence, and how they
It's
kind of.
insane.
What I tell people is like, hey, if you don't, I think one of the interesting aspects of the Western Hemisphere is we're seeing gangs, organized crimes, cartels, mafia. It's international, by the way. Like, it's not just Mexican. The Mexican cartels spread their violence to Ecuador, like Ecuador gang violence. In a lot of ways, you can tie it directly to Mexican cartels exporting their violence into Ecuador. And you saw that a lot in 2023 and 2024 specifically, a lot of that violence. Because of Mexican cartels expanding their operations south and exporting the violence everywhere. But you also see like the Albanian mafia, the Russian mafia, et cetera, right? So you see that. But in the Western Hemisphere as a whole, you're seeing gangs and all these groups really challenging state authority without a political motivation, which is kind of interesting when you're analyzing this from a foreign policy and kind of like national security aspect. It's not a political, it's a greed aspect. That grievance greed, this is greed. Brazil, Rio de Janeiro, I mean, the favela violence there is insane. I would keep an eye out for the Brazilian gangs. Just as the Mexican cartels replaced the Colombians, if the Mexican cartels drop in power, the one place I would be looking at, Brazil.
Really?
Brazilian gangs. But why did I bring up Haiti is I think Haiti is like the worst case scenario that if you don't take this problem seriously, what can happen? Because Haiti basically there's no functioning government, and you have gangs in many aspects being the power players of the country. And Kenya deployed, a UN-backed peacekeeping force. They have police and all that, and they're fighting, but they can't even achieve stability and security within their own country. And how can you have a political conversation, a political solution to a country who don't even control their own capital?
I'm not sure you can.
And so that's why I said the Haiti aspect is, that's the worst case scenario. But if the Mexican cartels get weakened seriously, 10 years from now, we might be having a similar conversation, but about Brazilian gangs.
Interesting. You oftentimes hear people talking about the cartels from, I guess, a more rudimentary perspective. It's street violence, it's intimidation. And I think that's a dangerous way to look at it. I'm just curious, in all of your time looking at them, what are some of the most sophisticated things you've ever seen them? Where you look and you're like, you know what? That's pretty damn good. That's pretty smart.
So they are, I think that's where I said the militarization, because you're right. People think, oh, it's street violence or maybe just homicides or we just hang a body. You saw the video.
Yeah.
That is not street violence. That's in a rudimentary way. That's force on force. These guys are battling it out for territorial control using military tactics that ISIS used in Syria. And that's what I said. Like, that's a lot of the violence we see is tied to that. There was this very famous, I'm not going to say that's smart, but we have
sophisticated, perhaps.
Sophisticated. I mean, they tried to develop an indigenous, it was like a artillery system. And
to launch it across the border?
Well, not across the border. No. Like actual artillery, like rounds against an enemy.
Okay.
Yeah. So you see them do that. You're seeing the drones. I think it's pretty smart. And I think the reason why the cartels I've criticized it heavily, but I think the reason why they use like the M82s is because it's very hard for them to have access to RPGs and anti-tank weapon capability. They have them, but not in large quantities. And I've talked to other open source intelligence accounts. one of the things they find interesting is like the M82, you see it very much so in the Western Hemisphere, but you don't see it in the Sahel, you don't see it in Iraq, Syria. And they say that as well, that's because it's coming from the US and it's very hard for them to ship it over internationally. That's why you see them here. I think that's a smart way, saying, look, we don't have that many RPG capabilities. Yeah, maybe we have an M1919 or maybe a 50 cal, but it's very easy for me to get this M82. Just put it on top, 50 cal. Maybe I try to get the an anti-tank round capability. Put it in there, shoot, and then and that weapon system, the M82, also almost every. It's almost like, I'm not going to say standard, but it's very universally accessible. Like almost every kind of cartel platoon, for the most part, at least one of them has that. You just see them walking around with that easily, almost like in an infantry platoon, you have like an M249. That's what they have. So that's what I would say. But they are becoming, I think, more and more and more sophisticated, and we're seeing that with the drones and the dropping of explosives. That's
Dude, the stuff out of Ukraine. I was just having this conversation with a buddy the other day. I was aware of commercial, what do they call it, OTS or on the shelf, whatever it is, drone technology. I own a couple of them. They're fun. You can fuck around with them. I never once even considered or thought about, when I was serving, having somebody chase me around with an FPV drone and to detonate it and then upload that footage to a social media platform. That type of warfare, and again, we're talking single drones. You hear people talking about swarm drones where you're sending 1,000, 10,000. And I have to think with the developments of AI, because people are like, oh, okay, it's you can use a jammer to interrupt the signal from the controller in the drone. Maybe, if they're using that type. What if it's a GPS navigation? Oh, we'll take the satellites out. Okay. I feel like AI can teach these things how to optically navigate. So the next thing you know, it doesn't even require anything. It's thinking on, not thinking on its own, but it's navigating on its own. Jesus, what did you find? This is why let's hit play.
This is against a tank. More appropriate for YouTube.
wow. Yeah, it's
I'm going to call that effective.
yeah.
I don't know what a 500-pound dumb bomb costs to be fired from a Reaper or Predator, let alone the Predator platform that, all those things associated with. I'm going to guess that is, from an economic perspective, much more feasible than having those platforms. I mean, that is changing the face of warfare. Man, I don't know what does it look like in 5 years?
I mean, I think that's the question that everybody's
Full
asking.
autonomous swarm.
I think drones are a kind of like an evolutionary prospect of warfare, and that's something that we're all going to have a conversation and really have to delve deep in both. And I can tell you, a lot of the conversations that are happening within the U.S. military and the U.S. Army, when I was in, I mean, that was a kind of an interesting aspect of the development of warfare. But I think one of how we should analyze it is it enables. Now you don't need a multi-million-dollar Javelin system.
You just hit on my favorite weapon system ever.
I love the Javelin. I think it's a phenomenal weapon system. But now it kind of...
I love the Javelin more than you do.
I do not don't doubt it. But it kind of provides those lower equipped, trained forces to have at least a capability that maybe not going to mirror or match, but okay, now you can provide a counterpunch.
But it's like a nation state level tool.
The Javelin or the drone?
The Javelin is. The drone, that's what I'm saying. The drone is no longer, it's like, that's more like a UPS level tool or FedEx or whatever the fuck they use in Ukraine. I don't know how they're getting them, but it changes. You came from an armor background.
Yeah.
Traditional warfare is, if we go back to the Civil War, fighting like absolute idiots, but maybe it was advanced at the time. Let's just line up in front of the person.
Yeah.
What we need is more people and better rifles. Armor, tanks. Okay, we need to have better tanks than our enemy. Well, now you have something that comes in a box that can be delivered to your house. Obviously, it needs to be weaponized, and it's no longer this my tank versus your tank. It resets this like fire. The emphasis on firepower and infrastructure. It's an interesting conversation.
Yeah, it's like the ATGM. I think that what I would kind of tie back is from the tank, what kind of changed a lot of the tank warfare that we had to adapt was, back in the 70s, 60s, 70s specifically, was the introduction of anti-tank guided missiles.
Yeah.
Like that, and I think the drones is the similar concept, but now it's cheaper.
Oh, yeah.
So that's the aspect.
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
No longer requiring a nation state.
Yeah.
Like, do we need to build as a nation state, though? You think to yourself, should we invest the money in a nuclear-powered aircraft carrier? Or do we build 1 million of these drones that cost a fraction of a penny? I mean, that is an interesting.
That's an interesting comment. Again, it goes back to even when everything we're talking about, even if we're dying, like the Mexico, what's your end state? What's your goal? And what are the capabilities you're looking for? And what's kind of the political objective you want to achieve? And then that frames kind of military development. And I think, all the way back from Sun Tzu, like strategy to tactics, strategy, operational warfare, tactical level warfare. In my time as an aide, I got to see that. And that's how it all ties together. But, the technology is rapidly changing. Our company leverages AI. We have mentioned that earlier.
Yep.
And that's the future aspect of it. And I think it's the same with warfare, because we haven't even talked about a development where the ability, we see it, right, with our system, our AI able to gather information at rapidly speed, and then more importantly, synthesize it, do an analysis for you. Like I can give you a threat assessment that you were to read it about Russia, Ukraine that our AI does, you would read it. It looks like an intelligence report because how we use the AI and the assessment and all that, and it literally will write it like high confidence, medium confidence, low confidence, percentage, likely, very likely, unlikely. These are the reasons that are going to be targeted next. What's the next course? Here's the courses of action. All that done by AI. And imagine you're an intelligence professional. Instead of you having you have an AI, boop, just pops it for you, and you just have to review it. Do you concur or not? If you concur, go ahead.
What's for you in the AI software that you're developing, the information, people's access to it? What is your hope or your company's hope what do you hope people do with it?
We would so again, this really for the average person, right? Because we have obviously for more private clients, corporate and all that, but really for what we think is you don't have to pay tens of thousands of dollars to have access to intelligence and information. It literally should just be $10. Here's all the sources from around because again, like social media is really driving either Twitter, Facebook. Like here's an interesting aspect, right? Like if you're really analyzing a lot of countries outside of the US, what's their primary news source? Facebook still.
Yeah.
Facebook, Telegram.
Well, Facebook made some really good deals with developing countries to be one of the only communication apps on their phone.
Mm-hmm. WhatsApp.
Strategery.
WhatsApp. That is like South America. You want to talk if you live or you're Hispanic, you need WhatsApp. Period. Nothing else matters. WhatsApp is the way to go.
Yeah.
That's how everybody talks in South America. What we think as a company is that you should be able to gather information and intelligence that you're interested in on the regions, no different than, let's say, a nation state or a government or even these corporations that pay tens of thousands of dollars. You should be able to access it at the palm of your hand for $10 a month.
How do you ensure...
Cheaper than the New York Times subscription, for example.
New York Times is a good example, or you could use the Post, whatever it is. How do you ensure that the AI doesn't pick up a bias in some way or another? Because a lot of people will say New York Times, Post. Pick like some are left wing, some are right.
And they're not. We're not trying to say they're like our competitors or anything like that, because it's just different.
It highlights people.
So our AI, how it addresses it, it will say, for example, we have a Russia-Ukraine feed, right? It will say, Russian Ministry of Defense states A, B, C, D, E. Ukrainian Ministry of Defense states 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right? But that's because that's how intelligence works. When you're doing open source intelligence and you're trying to gather information as it happens, as accurately as possible, you're picking up all these different types of information stream, intelligence reporting, all that, and it will highlight. We had it for Israel, Gaza, the situation in Israel, Gaza. It would report Israeli media reports. It would do like a summary. Israel claims this, Hamas claims this, Western media claims this, Russian media claims this, Chinese, like anybody who's reporting on that, it will give you a summary. And then that's the key aspect, right? So you get the information just as an intelligence, because I would say, like, I think people need to understand, if you're really interested in conflict and wars and even just or political crisis or development, et cetera, I think it's important to understand, because again, this is the intelligence aspect. What is Hamas claiming, for example? That matters, because if it's misinformation or lie, there's an interesting aspect of that when you're doing intelligence work. Why are they stating these things? Or it's important for them, because look at how Hamas has kind of transitioned and changed post ceasefire from, and now what they're trying to portray to the international community is this image of strength, victory, how they do the hostages, right? That is a key tenet of their messaging campaign that requires analysis to understand and how it is. You might agree or disagree with it, but if you're analyzing from an intelligence point of view, you want to understand that. And that's what we're trying to provide. And our AI will identify the actors who are saying it. It clears up. It knows when whoever's claiming what bias they have, and it will report it from the absolute totality of the reporting. And so our goal is to really provide that from a global aspect, in each individual country, and how you can access that information.
I have conversations with my dad, who is the oldest human being to ever walk the earth at the age of 78 now. He talks about news when he was younger. I feel like a name that he has used is Walter Cronkite.
Yeah.
But the man said something on TV. He told you what was going on, and he left it at that. And people would turn their TV off, and they'd say, you know what? I'm not going to question that. We live in a world now where every source is questioned through that lens of the bias, which is why I asked you. And I think being able to look at raw data absent editorialization is critical.
That's what we're providing.
Yeah, it's the editorialization, because somewhere along the way, and I'm not an expert enough or sociology expert or social media expert enough to understand where there was a point in our history where when you heard it on the news, on TV, and maybe we were wrong even back then, and this is probably predates me, when they would talk on the news, if you were able to find a legitimate news organization, they would tell you what's happening and maybe what to think about, not what to think. And it shifted to now, I think most people, to include myself, I wonder often as much about the person delivering the information as I worry about the information itself.
And that's where we really want to say, like, for example, I use the Mexico feed, right, that our company provides, and I analyze it. It will say, Chapitos state that. I want to know that.
Yeah.
It could be a lie. It could be an absolute lie. I don't care. I want to know what they're claiming, because it matters to specifically how you understand the overall situation. And that's the thing.
Yeah,
It's the raw data, the information. And it also will maybe that it gets, actual reporting and all that, and we'll say it out loud. And I think, for people who, because look, I mentioned, for example, when we were talking earlier, the New York Times did a phenomenal report about Michoacan, about a specific, that was 100% the New York Times. And I think, people can agree or disagree about how news is and all that is done. And I think that's a legitimate, fair, in a First Amendment country and democracy. You might love it, hate it, and criticize or do it. They provide absolute news. But it's to your point, what we're trying to focus in is that intelligence, raw data, straight to you. And so when one of the things we're building, for example, that I think nobody is talking about, which kind of blows my mind, is what's going on in the Democratic Republic of Congo with the region of Goma and their war with the M23 rebels that are Rwanda-backed. That's a huge crisis that's going on that nobody is talking about. And an interesting fact is the most violent war since World War II was the Congo Wars, the first and second Congo Wars that happened between 1996 to 2004. I think over 8 million people died. It was the most violent war since World War II.
I did not know that.
In the Congo. And right now, there's a concern is, are we entering the third Congo War right now because of the situation of the M23 rebels in Goma and the Democratic Republic of Congo? And we're building that feed. And so it's because the U.S., we focus on America, right? And maybe our interests. So
I think a lot of countries are exactly the same. We're not unique in that capacity.
And so that's not a problem. I'm not going to criticize that. Yeah. But maybe you're somebody who's like, wait a minute. Artorias app saying, there's a crisis going on in the... what? Let me check that. And then that's what we want to give you that information, because you might miss it. But that is a conflict and a crisis that I think, just as we're talking about Mexican cartels and the complexity of it, I'm in group chats in the OSINT community. They're like, are we about to enter in the third Congo War? And if you understand the history of that region, you're like, and the Congo War happened because of the Rwanda genocide. It's the Rwanda genocide, first Congo War, second Congo War. There's always these crises in the Congo Center. And now we're in a moment, it's like, is this a repeat? And what does that look like, with the advancement of warfare and everything? And I think that's a concern. And that's what we're trying to fill a vacuum in a lot of people who might not know and might not understand.
Do you think as a species we're evolved enough to be able to handle this volume of information? I wonder, I think social media, our connectivity is such an amazing tool. I have been able to connect with people.
We connect through
100%.
Through a guy on Twitter.
Yes,
yeah.
100%. So there's some great upsides. And you also see people, and I'm not saying this is a massive issue, but I think it is an issue. They are so focused on the things that they are seeing on their device that they forget to live their life. Because there's no fucking way that our brains can uptake, process, and deliver all of this.
I think that's where AI is going to come in.
I think we're going to work for robots and get a water ration every day real soon. What are your thoughts on the advancement of AI?
I think how we look at it and how we are analyzing it's a force multiplier. It's a force multiplier for dissemination and collection of information.
How do we keep the development of it in check? Is it even possible?
No, I don't think it's like this sentient being that can come out
Yet. Under the table, what I have for you is a tinfoil hat. I didn't know what size, so it's an adjustable ball cap. These are legit conversations. Again, I would never have guessed in growing up that I would walk around with a device that can connect me to almost anybody on Earth. Michael and I were watching some videos. It was an AI video. We'll leave the exact subject matter out of it. But it was Trump.
Fill in the blank, yeah.
It was Trump talking about a new policy where it's okay to call people certain things, and he just signed an executive order. And we were both saying, you can tell it's fake. The language is pretty good. The video is a little bit off, but this might be Gen 2 of this goddamn thing.
But that's where I think
what does Gen 10 look like?
But I think that's where the traditional media would kind of come in, because we're seeing that where, and you can disagree, or even just maybe not traditional media, but the human behind the screen. It's like, hey, this video now again, it's the tale of all this time. A lie can travel halfway around the world before the truth puts
Gets
you
out of bed. Yeah,
it's like, but that's has always existed in human history, right? So just the AIs is a different component, but that's the human element.
But I just worry if humans have. I just don't know if we evolve fast enough to keep up with how this other stuff is evolving.
I mean, look, so for example, it's like anything, right? And it's all about how you analyze it, the parameters you do for AI. But this, it's all, it's, and this is something we realize and we think is very important to highlight. Trash in, trash out. That's how AI works. So if you give it
input informs output.
So that's where we really focus on the AI, and that's kind of my role, is ensuring that the input for the information it collects on is valid. It could be a Russian state media, but I want that information to be collected, because if I don't, now I'm running into an issue as well. Am I actually getting a clear picture of the situation?
There's bias in not including it as well.
You need to have, because again, it's this raw data and intelligence. That's what we're doing. Because when I was doing S2 work, right? We would get OSINT roll-ups, and God, you want to talk about authorities? An OSINT collector, to have that level of authority to actually do OSINT collect,
stands for open source intelligence.
Open source intelligence. I gotta get this.
That's right.
I read that. Open source intelligence collect is higher than SIGINT, like signal intelligence. It is ridiculous because of intelligence oversight and all this. People, like if you have an open source intelligence collection authorities, dude, you're one of the few, because they are extremely strict on who can do that. They just don't want anybody to go on, even on your Twitter. Like if you're an intelligence person, I can't go and say, oh, look what I saw on Twitter. Nope, you're not allowed to do that. If you're an MI personnel, if you're filling in an S2 billet and as intelligence section billet or a G2 billet, you cannot go on Twitter and say, oh, look what I saw on Twitter. Nope, not allowed, because of intelligence oversight. And we want that. I'm not arguing to get rid of it.
Yeah.
But that's where, so we had to get all that open source intelligence information and reporting from higher, or maybe a different section and all that. But it really helped inform us. And it's like, yeah, I want to see, what are the Hamas, what are the Houthis, what is Iran, what is Russia, what is North Korea, what are they talking about? Because that helps frame, because that's a form of intelligence that we would cooperate with others and cross and compare. But if I'm not tracking what the Russians are claiming, I'm giving you a disservice as an intelligence officer, because if they might be saying the truth or a lie, and if they lie all the time, that's an interesting aspect of, well, does that show desperation? Does that show that maybe the situation is worse where they are if they're claiming every time we win? And we saw that especially in the beginning, everything is going great, we're winning. And then we saw the videos like, why are they lying? Like, what's going on? And because of the nation state of Russia and how they operate. That type of information matters. And I think a lot of the people who would benefit from that that's what they want. They want that, and they want that access to information and intelligence that we all probably been exposed in one way or another in our military careers.
What do you like doing other than digging in the N2 world? What other kind of hobbies you got other than tracking horrendous shit all over the globe?
Man, this has been a huge project.
Are you a pickleball player? What do you got? You like shooting hoops on the weekends?
So what I would say, I'm an avid reader. I love reading. It's something I got to pick up.
Favorite genre?
Nonfiction. I'm
You ever throw a vampire book in there from time to time? What do we got going?
I will say I'm kind of a sucker for Tom Clancy. One of the times, or some of those types of kind of like fictional books about the especially modern day. But one of the ones that I would say, even though it's nonfiction, the one that I like, I think the book is called. Oh my God, it's been a while. I think it's called 9 Lives. So there's a couple books that I've read like in a day, where like 200 page I can just read. And there's like 2 specific books of people that been Al-Qaeda operatives that were like churned over by either the CIA or MI6, so they tell their story of how they did that. Oh my God, like that type of book. Like if I can get something like that, especially if it's nonfiction, these are the guys telling it from their perspective. Oh, give it to me. I'll read it, because I think it's a very fascinating aspect of tradecraft and all that. I started also, I got medically separated from the Army. So I have like a lot of medical issues, but one of the things I really like enjoying at my own pace, obviously, is boxing. I think it's a very good way. I like it. I have a personal trainer.
You got a big wingspan too. You'd be a nightmare.
Well, I thank you, but I wish my body would agree with you. But I like boxing a lot. That's something that I do, and travel. I mean, me and my family, we just traveling.
Best place you ever been?
Oof.
It's tough because you could go for beauty, culture, history, anything that sticks out. What's the top of the pyramid for you? And maybe it's the pyramids. I don't know.
Yeah, well, I have been to the pyramids.
I have too, and they're pretty weird.
Yeah, there's,
the Marriott just off screen that they don't take the picture from that angle. You're like, what the fuck's going on here?
Yeah. Man, you got me. I mean, it's. I would say one of the trips that I think was from a kind of a holistic approach, from beauty, tourist, food. We did Capri in the Amalfi Coast in Italy. Mm-hmm. I mean, just the just the touristic, the beauty, the beaches, everything, but the food. And people think Italian is like pizza. And no, I mean, for me, like
it's a portion of Italian.
Yeah, but for me, it's like the tomatoes and the cheese. I was just like, oh my God. So I would probably say, Capri and the Amalfi Coast was one of my tops. And one place that I was very surprised by, and I think the country that surprised me the most, and I enjoyed the most, is I was in Singapore.
It's wild. I've been there many times.
Yeah, it just, one thing you see it on the TV, but then when you're actually there, it's like, oh my, like it just never stops. And it's just this rich, there's always something to do. There's so many places to go. There's so many to have fun or to just take pictures or whatever you want. I would say Singapore, but I mean, every country. Sorry, one special mention besides Mexico, because I obviously love Mexico. Anywhere in Mexico, and I tell this to the people here, like don't. I know we talked to a lot of skiers. Like Mexico's safe to travel. Always listen to the embassy. If you want to go to Mexico, just follow the embassy. The embassy will tell you anywhere you go around the world. The first place you go, State Department Travel Advisory.
It's almost like it's their job.
Yeah, that's their job, and they take that thing serious. They are very serious, and if there's a terrorist threat, they don't care at what classification level it is. They will find a way to make sure Americans are warned at an unclassified setting. And if they say something, listen to them. Absolutely listen. Just follow the State Department's travel guidance on travel to Mexico, because I love it. I love going to Mexico, the food, the culture, the music, tequila. I'm a huge tequila mezcal. Now I'm going more mezcal than tequila, funny enough. Love
Controversial.
It. I know. I might get canceled. But one country for me is magical is Colombia. Have you ever been to Colombia?
I have been to the jungles of Colombia.
The jungles of Colombia.
For training.
Yeah.
So I did not get to experience the culture. I got to experience the jungle that is either trying to bite, stab, sting, drown, trip, steal your shit. It's wild.
Cali. Oh no, I've been to Cartagena and Medellin. Love both of them. Like just magical experience. I loved it. So that I would also say though that Colombia as well has a very special place because I just truly enjoyed it.
What about a bucket list? Do you have any locations that you want to go you haven't?
Yes, I would say I would thoroughly like to go to somewhere. Either like the Maldives, I think that's something always that caught my attention. French Polynesia or that area in the Pacific, that's something. But I think those are more very classical examples. What did I see? One I would love to do, it would be kind of a safari in Tanzania. I think that's something that would also be on my bucket list.
That would not suck.
Yeah.
That wouldn't suck.
I think that would be awesome.
Man, I'm running out of bucket list stuff. I've checked them. I had Ireland for a long time. Mine are a little bit less... exotic than yours. Like the Maldives and the Amalfi Coast. I'm like, I'd like to go to a pub in Ireland, get
I
shit-faced.
know, I agree with you. So the issue is I lived in Spain
Yeah.
a long time when I was a teenager. I lived in Spain. So a lot of that aspect in Europe
Yeah, the
was
inter-Europe
very...
travel,
Never been to Ireland, which is, you're true, but...
It was really cool.
Yeah, I would love to do that. It's just because I had that exposure to a lot of it, and I traveled a lot around Europe. It's and I lived there. It's kind of like... Oh, I mean, it's like if you're an American and you lived in California. It's like in my bucket list. Not to sound arrogant or anything, but it's kind of like how I would when you live in the European Union. It's really like that kind of like living in America, like California to New York.
Yeah,
it's like Spain, Madrid to Berlin. It's the same. It's that same concept, and so it's so easy to travel around that. Traveling in Europe. Living in Europe is almost like living in America, and a lot of Europeans, the reason why they travel around Europe is like the Americans traveling inside the United States.
It's so easy to do.
And there's so much, but that just becomes like second nature to you. That for you, like I've been to South Korea, and I would love to go to Japan. I've never been there.
I've been to both. Fantastic.
Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah, so I was able to hit Ireland. Iceland, I've been a few times. Fucking amazing.
I would love to go there.
Greenland is popping up on my bucket list. Now that I've knocked a bunch of them off, I'll be honest with you. It might be because I'm not advocating for us seceding or ceding Greenland, but it's like some of the pictures that show up. I'm like, God damn, that's beautiful. Mm-hmm. So it did hit my radar because of the current commentary. I'm not advocating for that necessary approach, but okay, pretty beautiful. And other than that, man, it's like I've been to all 7 continents.
This is my first time, for example, Montana.
Yeah.
Thoroughly enjoying it. I know it was a short trip, but thoroughly enjoying it. It's just, especially kind of seeing the mountains and all that and the green. I mean, I remember just like landing on like just absolute white snow forest mountains. Like, oh my God, this is so
and today is
beautiful.
Completely foggy. It's actually, it's a lot more picturesque when the fog isn't 200 feet above ground.
Yeah.
But yeah. What else you want to close out with, man? We've been at it for a couple hours.
I mean,
closing thoughts.
I think, first of all, thank you very much.
My pleasure.
This was a great conversation. Loved having it. I think, it's kind of crazy for I've been doing this for the cartel aspect for 3 years, and I've been like banging my hand against the table saying, focus more on Latin America, focus more on cartels. And now kind of like my wish came true, and I'm like, dang it, shit. Because now it's the misinformation, just like in any conflict. You guys like wild takes on Twitter, and I'm just, or X, and I'm just like no, okay, like let's stop. And so it's kind of that. Sometimes I did kind of find it a little bit frustrating. I feel like I'm fighting more misinformation on Twitter or
This
X
morning is actually a good example of this. You
Yeah.
know, I woke up to the absolute catastrophe between the helicopter and the airplane in D.C. I have never encountered so many aviation experts that have about 12 hours on the job who are more vocal about how it could happen and have absolutely no idea about our airspace, how aircraft are controlled. It's wild.
Yeah. That's a problem, I think, and that's the kind of where I've run into it, because people, I'm the same, and and I think we all saw it, unfortunately, and our heart goes out, hearts and thoughts and prayers to the victims of that tragic accident. But it's like, hey, we have a tragedy. Like, yes, there should be experts commenting. We want to make sure that this doesn't happen again. But you're not one of them. So how about you take a backseat? Like, I'm not going to talk about that on my.
Yeah, just take a breath, take a knee, and even the experts also take a breath. And maybe let's figure out what happened, and then you can weigh in with expert commentary on how that was possible and what could be done to fix it in the future.
Yeah. So that's where, for me, I'm kind of battling a little bit about the kind of from the cartel piece.
Yeah.
But I think it's also given me an opportunity to now, like I said, because of the focus now, I've been with the Rolling Stones. I've helped, some of them I can't name because I helped them in the background. I'm hoping, maybe I can go, but also major news organizations as well that I love. Hey, if you're a small YouTube, big YouTube journalist, citizen journalist, investigative, I don't care. You could be anybody. DM me. I'm more than happy to have a conversation, give you my opinion, try to back it up with evidence. Love it. I think it's great. I love that people are thinking about it and conversation about it. And so, that's something that I find it very interesting, and I'm glad the opportunity here. And I'm glad the opportunity of talking also our company and AI, and we had a good segment of that because that's something we really want to push forward. And that would just be my closing comment. So again, thank you very much. And I appreciate our common friend who introduced us virtually.
Oh, sure.
And it was
awesome.
great.
That's the beauty of this. So All Source News on, I'm just going to fucking call it Twitter. I don't even care. On Twitter. And then when this app comes out, people would be finding it in the App Store.
Yeah. So if you go, I'll show it. We just created an Instagram, and maybe when this comes up, we could tag it. So
for sure. Yeah.
So we just have a YouTube. We just created an Instagram. But if you go to Artorias,
if you spell that for Michel.
Artorias, Artoriis. And then you could put tag, because there's, you can even go to
IOUS, Michael, not double I. That's crazy writing of you.
I can't even see. No.
Dark Souls, Artorias.
No. So the bottom one, but remove. So if you go on
Artorias.com/solutions, there you go. Click
there you go. That,
bam.
Wow, that's a little bit too big. I don't know what happened there. But that's our page. We're on Twitter. Artorias Tech is our Twitter handle. On Instagram, we're Artorias YouTube. And so if you go to our Instagram and our YouTube, we are uploading a lot of our Bluff podcast. We call it the Bluff.
Bottom line up front, people.
Yep. So we have a lot of people because we have a lot of experience in the open source intelligence world. We bring a lot of those people because it's just like me. Like, you would be surprised, and I would tell people, like, don't ever underestimate a college kid or a high school kid, their ability and their knowledge about world topics and what they can cover.
Oh, for sure.
A lot of the guys who got really famous in open source intelligence started out in high school. For example, myself, we did a lot of Cartel Observer. They work for they volunteer work for Borderland Beat. They do awesome reporting on cartels. A lot of them are in college, and they are phenomenal.
You know how to use these tools, and you can get you can craft these tools and make them do what you want to do. The information that you can come back with is unbelievable.
These guys are rock stars. There's so many, like geo pernicious propaganda. There's so many out there, and they are just dedicated. They don't do it for the money. They don't do it for the fame. They just found a passion, and that's what they do. And they're great. But yeah, that's us. We'll make sure to share all our socials with this. But
please,
that would be
just
great.
Email me all the links and stuff, and we'll do it. Cool, man. Well, I appreciate the time, and thanks for making the travel. Hell yeah.